really loud and clear.
Hello, friends. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and NBs to Warui Deshou. This is Stream of Thought, the final episode. Well, for Wonder Egg priority, I was going to say it might not be. There's more to come, but the television, but the television season of Wonder Egg for winter 2021 is over, and we are here as a group to dissect the details, to comb through the wreckage, to pick through the rubble and see what nuggets we can find. And we're going to share that with you all. I am the Subtle Doctor. Along for the ride on this Bad Anime podcast, as usual, is my friend, your friend, our old buddy, Manchester's manliest Chester, the most marvelous one, Shadon.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Very happy Easter, very happy Friday, happy World Awareness Days. Everyone, hope you're all doing really well. Oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. Holy shit.
Yep, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun, but thankfully we have, of course, with us one of our most favoritist guests. I think that she, and in fact, I know that she is now, I think, our most repeated, most often had guest.
Oh, wow.
You have that
Congratulations.
championship belt. I think you and Alexander are competing for it. But I think you're in the top spot now. It is.
She does it 2 more times, she gets a free coffee.
That's a punch card. Yeah. It is esport aficionado, floral linguist, anime blogger extraordinaire, Emily Rand.
Hello.
Woo.
Hello, Emily. You were getting compliments on your T-shirt in chat.
Yeah, a Hannibal t-shirt. It's by a fan artist that I really like. I like all of their stuff, but yeah, I decided to support them, so you can check them out. I believe it's at Woods_JPEG. If you just search it, it'll. I'm terrible at like advertising other people's stuff, but they're really great. So check out their stuff. I just like the t-shirt.
And it looks great. It looks great.
Oh, that t-shirt.
Yeah, and other things that look great some of the time are anime. Wonder Egg in particular.
Oh, are we starting off there?
Yeah, we're going there, aren't we?
Well, okay. That should we have like a pre-show banter to warm us up before we get into the Wonder Egg?
That actually could be a good idea, because we can just get all of the production stuff like out of the way as like a, by the way, we're well aware of this, and maybe you should know as well.
Yeah.
What happened?
Oh, all right then.
Yeah. Right. That's very important.
I'm gonna go right in and just say, no show is worth putting someone in the hospital for. I feel like that's all I really could end up saying or should end up saying, because everything else is moot at this point. One of the producers, I don't remember his name offhand, and he actually tweeted that he had been to the hospital twice, I think, following or during the production of episode 12, saying something to the effect of, I'm really glad I have something more important in my life. This tweet was then deleted, was then reshared. I believe that Anime Empress, one of Brad Kaiser's colleagues on Twitter, has reshared it from an archive before it did get deleted. And yeah, Wonder Egg has been beset with production problems for most, if not all, of its run, which is not acceptable under any circumstances, and it's especially not acceptable when, as I say, it's literally causing actual hospitalization of its staff. Jesus Christ. It almost made me want to just simply say, like, I don't care about whatever happens in the rest of these 2 episodes. It's not worth it because someone's actually been hurt as a result of this. It's a joke. And I can't believe that a show like this, which is about or covering systemic exploitation of some sort, is in turn then allowing ongoing systemic exploitation of the people creating it. Kind of undercuts and makes it feel a little hollow, if you know what I mean. Maybe that's unfair of me to say, but Jesus Christ.
No. It's not, I don't think it's unfair. I mean, I'm glad all this, of course, is being reported on for Wonder Egg, but like, I mean, this is just a systemic problem with the industry. It's, you know, I mean, the poor individual, the producer, I think it was, I think this is the second time that they've been hospitalized, this most recent time. And I think that they were in the hospital for like 5 hours on a drip and then went back to the studio. And it's just like a culture that, like, you know, either explicitly or implicitly like pushes its employees, its labor to do that. I mean, it's just it's really horrific. And this is not pre-show banter, but it is something that, like, Emily's right, that we should. It's not banter, but we should get it out of the way, but we should discuss it before we get into like the show itself.
I'll say one thing about Wonder Egg specifically, and this has been covered extensively at Sakuga blog, so you should definitely check out all of their stuff on it, because I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot from what Kevin has said on Twitter and also what they've written about on their blog. But Wonder Egg is a little bit different than other cases in the anime industry, so that's not to say that it's not incredibly toxic and profiting off of the fact that so many people are freelancers, et cetera. But Wonder Egg specifically is a sort of outlier only because, and like a kind of a really sad one, because you have this really crack team that is very small and has like big vision that they want to execute and is very stubbornly insistent that they're going to stick to this team, which is not a bad thing, but ends up that they did not budget their time and resources well, and underestimated how much this was going to be able to take. And honestly, like, the show itself, as someone who is like sort of on the periphery of the whole Sakuga community, like, I pay attention, sometimes don't pay attention, other times really use people in that community as my resource, because it's not a visual language that I'm as familiar with. I can't recognize cuts, you know, et cetera, a lot of the time. But it seems like this is something that, to me and my eye, I did not notice a visible dip, like a really visible dip, until the past like few episodes, and even then only episode 12, I would say.
Oh boy, this
is like the definitely the one where you can see the toll. You can see that this was finished hours before broadcast. And to me, the most egregious thing outside of everything people have already said about, hey, like, this is incredibly unhealthy and toxic, is also the way that I don't know if this came from the production committee or a head or someone that was not part of the animation team, but like the way that information was relayed about what was going to happen, right? So they had to take the recap episode because they weren't going to get done on time. And it was labeled as episode 8 instead of, like 7.5 or
Right.
however you typically label an intermediary episode where you are kind of rushing it in because you need time. Because we've had rebroadcasts or like later broadcasts before, right? Where we have had issues,
Mhm.
have had production issues, and it's been communicated and it's broadcast later. Like Wonder Egg is going to have their finale, their actual finale, proper finale in June, at the end of June.
Yeah.
Because that presumably that's the next time they could find that they could actually air it, because a lot of it has to do with like airtime scheduling, right?
Mhm.
But with Wonder Egg, they labeled it as 8, so we didn't know, or like
Mhm.
until like there were rumors. People are like, yeah, there's gonna be another episode. It's gonna come at a later time. There were a lot of rumors, but that wasn't confirmed until after episode 12 aired. So like it's
Yeah.
pretty nuts. And like I have my own opinions on the content of episode 12 and why it wouldn't be necessarily awful to end there in terms of emotional narrative, but
Yeah.
putting all
Right.
that aside, the communication was shit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and like it seems like a very bad attempt to cover up like incredible structural problems with planning for this
Mhm.
anime. So on top of that, the messaging was terrible.
Yep. That specific thing you mentioned, by the way, about episode 12, I mean, I need to clarify here. Like, there are times when I criticize a work for having bad animation, and there are times where I criticize work for having bad animation that is clearly more of a like where it's a strain on the actual talent. Because make no mistake, the people making Wonder Egg are incredibly talented. I think the show overall looks phenomenal, and
Mhm.
in an ideal world, it would have been produced in such an environment with the necessary support, resources, and timescale. So, well, it didn't literally put people in the hospital. But there was one scene that really highlighted it. It was in episode 12, and you have all 4 of the girls on this like park hill, and you've got this zoom in shot, and it goes like this all the way in while they're talking. And it gets to the point where at the end of the zoom, it is pixelated. It's like if you zoom in on something that you've screenshot and put in paint. And it just gets all pixelated. I was like, that's very clearly, a seam in all of this. And here's the thing, right? That is arguably bad animation, but I'm not going to criticize the show for that in the sense of the people on the show didn't know what they were doing. But rather, I'm going to criticize it in that they knew what they were doing and just simply weren't given the support, time, etc. necessary to make it happen. This isn't X-Arm, for crying out loud, thankfully. This isn't that, where they just had no idea at all what they were doing. But yeah, like that scene alone just really highlights me that this was, as Emily Wright pointed out, finished hours before it came out. It was literally hot off the press, and it's not
That's
acceptable
wild.
for this to happen.
That's wild.
It's literally going to kill someone.
Yeah. And I mean, like, do you guys think this is, of course, secondary to like the health concerns of the staff, but like, do you think that the like the story has suffered because of the schedule? Do you think it's like, oh my gosh, like it's so obvious that they're just like flying by the seat of their pants here and they haven't really planned out, or maybe they had these ambitions and like have realized that like they can't do them, so they're having to rework everything? Like, do you buy into that line of thinking?
I mean, I think it actually depends on what the proper finale is going to be. Like I said, I think there's actually a really good argument for the fact that the episode 12, which we're going to talk about, is the narrative conclusion of Oto's like emotional narrative. Like there's a really big argument for that. So in terms of like whether this was what they meant to do, I don't know. Would it have been the end of the world if it ended here? I actually don't think so, which I think is a very unpopular opinion right now. But like I don't think it would have been the end of the world. I think you could make an argument for this is the conclusion of her emotional narrative, and now you have to unpack like what that means, and in relation to the rest of the show, and maybe you won't like a lot of the answers there. I don't like some of them, but it's I don't think it's as bad as like people are making it out to be in terms of the narrative conclusion if you're only paying attention to like her emotional narrative. Now, in terms of all the other stuff the show is doing and what it seems like they were trying to do, no, I don't think it was a particularly good conclusion, and I don't think it definitely seems like they had to change certain things, probably depart a little bit from what they wanted to do in order to like wrap it up in a way that isn't terrible to think about and also has something looking forward to the future. But that also gets into what you're explaining versus what you're not, which is like I have a whole rant about that for later since we're doing the last two episodes. So I'll just say that for now.
Okay.
So we can move on because I feel like I've already talked too much.
No, not all. I'll just add that the way the story is structured is that, like, if this is indeed, as Doc says, an issue where they've kind of scripted things by the seat of their pants,
which is not necessarily what I think.
I don't think that's the case at all. I think they have to change things, but I definitely think there's a very clear narrative.
I'm putting this out there as like a theory to respond to.
Yeah, I think that if that were the case, then it wouldn't make any sense, only because the story has only gone more complex. I mean, the addition of Frill and everything that revolves around her is an additional layer of complexity. Whereas if you were wanting to like try and script your way out of production issues, you try and simplify it dramatically. Whereas this is a layer of complexity.
Frill is a good episode 11 for a 25 episode show, not a 12 episode show.
But I do have to say as well, like, there are very clearly things that will not be wrapped up that should have been, or things that have been dropped or omitted, like, or have not been fleshed out of. One of which I can think immediately of is Neru.
Oh man!
Like what happened with her and her guardian animal, which I can't remember what the name of the snake was, but you know which one I'm referring to. It might have been Pinky. I'm not sure.
It was Pinky.
Oh hey, I got it.
You got it. Yeah, nice one.
So yeah, like we don't even see what happened with her. Her narrative arc, like, she had a thing going on with her sister, so that's the thing I'm referring to here. I don't know what the hell's happened with that, if anything at all, in the finale next time we come back in June. Momoe's relationship to Sawaki, him being her uncle, that was dropped, and that plays no part in the resolution of Ai's character conflict, and maybe it shouldn't have done, in which case my argument would be don't make them related at all if it doesn't have any like meaningful value to what goes on. Like, all that happens is they bring us like, no, he's not a bad person, and I get that kind of ties into what is revealed in episode 12 a little bit, but it just feels very perfunctory. So yeah, like I do agree with Emily that there are things that I think that this show was basically begging for a double length run. I think it needed a full 24 episodes, I would argue, to cover everything it wanted to do. And it could have easily filled that time out, like, with some actual, like, substantive stuff, but we didn't get that. Yeah. We got, this instead.
Well, I didn't even feel as strongly about that take until pretty recently. But I think, I mean, I can't help but sit here today and say that feels right. But before we, like, really, like, get stuck in to the episode, we do have a plot summary, the plot summary in under 2 minutes to get to. We have to talk about we have to do our small part in, like, shouting out creatives that we haven't talked about, and also I think it would be good, knowing how our conversations go, for us to, like, before we get into specific points and patron questions, to each give a very quick blurb in terms of how we feel about these episodes in a very broad sense. So let's tackle those things one at a time. Let's first do creatives, I think, and then we'll do the plot summary. So there's only one creative that we have not talked about yet, because the episode director for episode 12, Yuki Unamori, we already talked about because they directed episode 3. So we're going to be speaking about Noriko Takao, who directed and storyboarded episode 11 of this show she did. And you may remember Miss Takao, Shadon. This is a person that you said you owe a pint to. No. You've said you owed a pint to this lady because her exemplary directorial and storyboarding work on Darling in the Franxx episode 5. Like
Ooh.
it was
Yes.
like the good episode. That like the
Why
one
is-
of the
why
bright
is
spots.
Everyone, every time I'm here, Darling in the Franxx somehow comes up.
It's unavoidable.
Another show with great flower language, by the way.
I know.
It always had that going for it.
I mean, she also did the episode, the one where we had James Beckett on, shouts to him, where Hero got punched, and that was directed by her as well.
Penultimate one.
So she,
yeah.
so she was responsible for bringing us that moment of glory and catharsis. So I think I'd best put another notch on the list for another pint at this point. Might as well buy her a whole cask at this rate.
Indeed. So she's a familiar name, I think, to people interested in Kyoto animation, because she's worked at like a lot of the early KyoAni works that people know, like the Full Metal Panic stuff that they did, which I would believe was like the second raid and I can't remember how to pronounce Fumofu, I think it's called. But she was a key animator on FMP, and she worked on a bunch of Haruhi, storyboarding and animating the TV and the movie stuff. Worked on K-On! 1 and 2 in episode directorial and storyboarding role, as well as some key animation. And then we talked about, the other stuff, the Darling and the Franxx stuff. And I actually don't know if this is KyoAni off the top of my head. Clannad. Did they do Clannad and Clannad Half Story, or was that another studio?
Kyoto Animation did Clannad, yeah.
Okay. So she's there too, on the first season and After Story, playing prominent role. So a veteran with some really exemplary work under her belt. Also lent her talents to this episode, the Frill episode of Wonder Egg Priority. So now, Shadon, the time has come. The time is upon us.
Before you get into that, I want to just add one thing to your talk about
go for it.
that I think is worth saying, which is, as much as I came out of the gate there with a bit of fire and brimstone about this show's production and how it's ultimately hurt the people who've made it, I can think that while also simultaneously crediting them for all their amazing work throughout. This show has looked, for the most part, phenomenal, and any times it hasn't is not, again, because of the lack of talent, ambition, or etc. from the creators, but rather just that they've not been adequately supported. So I just want to be clear that my ire is directed at the system that allows this kind of thing to happen, but I can still at least give them credit for what they have actually done, and maybe even more so given the circumstances in which this show was created. But yeah, I just want that to be clear, because I think that they ultimately do still deserve all the accolades for all the amazing shots, cuts, animation, all the Saka stuff you talked about, Emily, for example. It's still a great looking show regardless. I just wish it wasn't made in the way it was, to be honest.
Totally.
Anyway, 2 minutes summary time.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Right. So, okay, Shadon, are you ready? Do you need to take a sip of water? Do you need to limber up, stretch, do vocal exercises?
Start
Me.
talking with his girl Friday level of dialogue.
I was going to say, if you're
Gotta
willing
get going.
if you're willing to give me 50 minutes, I can't adequately prepare, by which I mean I'm going to rewatch the episodes.
Okay.
But no, I am ready whenever you are, Doc. So lay it on me.
All right, my friend. For those at home that don't know, we are going to do a 2-minute plot summary, because I think people were rightly getting on our cases that we were spending too long summarizing episodes in the distant past. But we also feel that for these videos, to exist as VODs or podcasts that people listen to, years from now, maybe, hopefully, they want some kind of context laid out and given for what we're going to talk about. So Shadon is going to give a 2-minute plot summary of episodes 11 and 12 of Wonder Egg Priority, starting now.
Okay, so we've got Akka Musk and Akka Bezos deciding they're going to be really bored. They're actually going to go make themselves a girl because why not? You know, we just do that. We're going to make in the bathtub. We could actually be doing something in that bathtub, like making moonshine or a medicinal product. No, we're going to make a girl instead. We're going to impose all of our ideas as men about what this little girl should be like. We're going to name her, or rather, she's going to name herself Frill, and then we're going to say it's a good name. Right, moving on. Frill grows up. Frill is, you know, all sugar and spice, everything nice, everything seems pretty rosy. But then one of the
30
actors, or two
seconds.
of them, when they decide to do their lab work in a nightclub, meet Asusa, who marries one of them, has it, and is like pregnant, and then Frill gets very jealous, kills her because holy shit. And then next thing you know, Frill is thrown into a basement somewhere and locked away because she's not a regular human; she's sort of a robot. And then it turns out that the daughter survives, and she then dies, commits suicide. Turns out Frill might have pushed her over the edge somehow, and that is why the Akkas are doing this to try and stop Frill from, like, you know, pushing girls to commit suicide. And that
1
is all
minute
being
left.
told to I. Okay, next episode. All of our main characters decide not doing this anymore, save for I, who goes back into the egg world, hatches an egg. It's her! Oh my god, how did this happen? Turns out it's I from a parallel universe where she sadly did kill herself. And they fight back against Sawaki, monster form, who turns up, as I predicted, that he was going to pop up. And in the end, I overcomes him with the power of determination and self-like confidence. However, while that resolves her emotional arc, it does not unfortunately deal with Frill or her like daughters. So that's going to be what follows in the episode in June. I think I've covered everything. Whew.
You've done it with 20 seconds to spare. So good work. I think that you hit all the. Is there anything that he missed in Emily that you can think of in a?
Not in terms of like raw plot summary.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of stuff is up for interpretation, so especially in the final episode.
Well, excellent work, my friend. You have done it. You have, you know.
All right, I'm going on a cigarette break back in a minute.
You're way better at that than me. I'll just say, but that's to be expected, I think. So, well, before we get into it now, you know, we've got patron questions. I think are first up on the docket, but. Patrons, what are those? Well, I'm glad you asked, viewer. Patreon.com/Warui Deshou. That's patreon.com/WARUIDESHOU. Gets you all kinds of wonderful little perks and rewards if you subscribe for $2, $3, or $5. We like to keep our tiers budget friendly. This stream that you're watching right now, of course, is free to all. This is our Stream of Thought program. But to ask questions that we absolutely must answer, no matter what they are, then you need to be a member of the $2 tier, $2 a month, that is, of our Patreon. And then you can ask us any question you like related to the Stream of Thought thing we're currently covering. And we will answer it on the air in depth, in detail, and force our guests to also answer said question. So keep that in mind. That is a tertiary benefit to this. But check out the other tiers. So if you see something you like and you want to support us, we would appreciate it. But by no means do you have to do that to be a fan or to be appreciated by us. So all right, Shadon. You were the man with the patron questions, so wheel out that cart of questions.
Are we not doing our
Oh shoot, you're right. Yep, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I did say that. So why don't you then?
Organization.
I know.
It's probably are. It's probably do.
Yeah, this is part of the bad podcastness of the brand is like
That's
trying to be organized, like, and not writing it down, just like keeping it in the brain.
We own this.
So why don't you start us off then, Shadon? Give us a very broad, brief overview of your feelings on 11 and 12.
This is difficult to keep it. I mean, I know I just did a 2-minute summary of the plot, but doing a 10-second summary of how I feel is actually incredibly difficult, especially given what people no doubt know about me and my blabbermouth. Okay, I'll just basically keep it down to this. Episode 11, I think has, depending on how you look at it, I think has a really, really strong, like, metaphoric message behind it. But I cannot deny that there are people out there, and I know of one person who's made a comparison I absolutely have to address firsthand later, that think that it's the worst thing ever because because of its implications.
Count me
So it depends how
in
you
that
read it.
group, I think.
Oh boy, we'll get to that.
Can academically appreciate maybe certain things about the episode, but feel not great about it. Maybe we're talking about the same thing, maybe not. We'll see.
We'll see. And so I'm gonna have to thrash out with you both and figure out how I feel. Episode 12, I think, was, as Emily rightly pointed out, a great personal finale for and I think would have made a sound finale for the show had it been structured a little differently. I actually found it very personally affecting as well, for a reason that I will get into later, which is how I've chosen to interpret the message the show gives. And because I think episode 12 actually is a really powerful anti-suicide message. And it's this message I have heard before, but it is told in this episode in a way that I have never seen before, and I actually felt quite affected by it. But I'm going to have to hold my cards on that one. I'm going to have to keep them close to my chest for later. But yeah, my overall opinion is 11 is as good or as bad as you feel it is, and no one's any right has any right to say otherwise. Episode 12, for me, I think was a fine finale for the most part. I just wonder if episode 13, when it comes around, will feel perfunctory relevance relative to this. So we'll see. But yeah, overall positive, I guess. Maybe, sort of. I don't know. We'll figure out.
How about you, Emily?
I think with these two episodes, you see a lot of the push-pull that shows that use entire other visual languages, like flower language, which I'll probably talk about later. If someone doesn't ask a question about it, you can ask me about it in chat or whatever to explain. Because episode 11 actually has some of the tightest visual bookending with that other language that they've been using this entire show, right? So that's like a point in its favor. However, you compare episode 11 to episode 12, and it's really interesting that these two came back to back, because I think you see the two things that, again, shows with symbolism and shows with other visual languages really struggle with to execute, and it's tying those two things together in a way that makes sense for the emotional narrative. And here you see them trying to explain the in-universe mechanics through two very unreliable narrators in the Akkas, who come off looking remarkably terrible, even in the story that they are telling from their perspective.
Where shit we do it?
And then you have, and also the best part, I was watching this with a friend, and I'm pretty sure she pointed out that, like, she was like, I don't even think I asked for any of this. Like, I don't think she even asked a question. They just, like, decided to, like, start talking.
Yes. Why did she go there?
But anyway, so props for pointing that out.
Now that you're here, let me tell you our life story.
Yeah, exactly. I know you weren't wondering about this at all. It's a metaphor.
I just wanted an egg.
Half of the audience. So then you have this incredibly emotionally powerful episode in 12 where very little is explained outright. And I think to bring this to actually two of the directorial influences on the show. One is Kunihiko Ikuhara, who I think is really good at doing this. He's really good at explaining none of, like, what you think you want explained, which is in-universe mechanics. Like, why are they fighting behind the school every day? Who cares? Like, why are there penguins here? Who cares? Like, no one cares, honestly. Like, what is a penguin drum? No one cares. It just kind of leaves you, like, dangling. And the more important thing that's explained through the visual symbolism is, the emotional narratives. Like, how do people feel about this? How did this impact people? How are people relating to each other? Like, what does that mean for all of the framing devices that we are using, be that fairy tales or, certain iconography and stuff like that? And I feel like Wonder Egg kind of fails at this with episode
Mm.
11, to be honest. Especially if you're comparing it back to back with episode 12, because they're so very different. And the other influence on the show by a significant margin, especially with the way that flower language is used, is Naoka Yamada. And she used a ton of flower language, specifically in her episodes in Violet Evergarden, which Fujita kind of took from her, but also Silent Voice is probably the best example of tying in an entire other visual language to say something incredibly poignant that's related to the emotional narrative of the show. And I have to say, there is in my opinion, with the events of episode 12, a disconnect between the visual language that they use in choreography and the end result. And we'll get to that later. But back to back, these episodes are they bump up against each other in a way that's, in my opinion, very unflattering for episode 11. But again, I'm also someone who does not care about in-universe mechanics. Like, I don't care. I just don't. Like, I care so much more about the emotional narrative and what you're trying to say. And like if you want to say something really poignant about suicide, you can show that to me instead of explaining all of this stuff about this girl that we decided to create and how she's somehow influencing people, and we're using their energy, and there's Eros and Thanatos and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, well, I don't care. I just care about the characters that you made me care about previously, and what their emotional narratives are, and how people are profiting off of their pain in a really negative way, and how they're going to try to overcome that through befriending each other. Like that those are the strongest parts of the show for me. That was the strongest part of episode 12, is when I ends up basically having an entire conversation with herself, regardless of how convoluted and or like forced people feel like that the circumstances of that were happening. That was a really important thing to happen for her emotional narrative.
Yes.
So yeah, enough rambling. On to what you thought.
Oh boy, what did I think? In some ways, I'm counting on this show to help me figure that out because, man, when I watched these episodes, I had a lot of big feelings, but how to disambiguate them from each other, parse them, pull them apart, label them. I don't know. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be interesting. There, 11 I think was very, very strong in some respects. Like, I was like, oh boy, a new character, great. But by the end I was like, oh my god, like I really care about what happens to this person a lot. But at the same time, there were some things that they were kind of implying through that character, which like troubled me. And I'll talk about those, as we get deeper into the weeds. And then episode 12, I mean, I just sort of had, I'm big dummy who likes to pretend they're smart about anime on podcasts and YouTube.
Don't be silly.
So like, I'm just like episode 12.
I'm an idiot.
You're not.
Just throwing that out
You're
there.
not. You're totally not. But like, yeah, just episode 12. I mean, like, just what the fuck occurred, and sort of what is true in an absolute sense and what is true in one timeline that may be false in another timeline. This is all kind of like, I think I'm getting too caught up in those details in my brain and not sort of focusing enough on what you were talking about, which is like the emotional narrative, which I do agree with you is far and away, and I've said this before, but I'll repeat myself, it's just like the strongest part of the show. I mean, I think like the sci-fi story I never really cared too much about. Like what are the metaphysics of the egg world? Like, I mean, at this point, like I'm so invested in the quartet of egg ladies that like I just sort of like don't care. I do think that, for all the good things I think that the episodes do, I think one of my, maybe, I don't know if it's my biggest or second biggest kind of hang up is like, I feel like episode 11 recontextualizes almost the whole show in some sense and makes everything kind of about this conflict between the Akkas and Frill that the other characters are kind of like, pawns might be too strong, but they're just sort of like players in the play that is about Frill versus the Akkas. And
this is on a go board, you might say?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they're very important ones, to be sure, because they've gotten so much screen time and they've gotten attention from the Akkas and everything like that. But I just would have been, I think I would have been more gung-ho about the show if the Akkas didn't really get like a sort of sympathetic backstory and like, this show was well and truly about Ai and about Nehru and Rika and Momoe, in all senses. So yeah, I guess I'm conflicted. Even though I think again I think there was some really like strong storytelling, just these certain choices that kind of made me overall feel not as great. And then it just doesn't help that like I kind of lost the thread in 12. So maybe some of the strengths about 12 that Emily is like effusive about, and I'm hoping that I can, like, through your talking about them kind of and rewatching the episode, like, come to better grips with them. Because like I wanted to like 12 more, but again I just couldn't. My brain has been under a lot of stress, so could not process it in the most adequate way. So that's kind of how I feel about it. Ramble. There's my feeling on it. And I guess we'll talk about after, like maybe at the end, how we felt about the show as a whole. But okay, is it time now for patron questions?
I believe it is.
All right.
So I suppose let's do it. Right then, we have 4 questions today from 2 people. The first 2 of which come from Kate Rose. And I think that I'm going to say ahead of time, having read these questions, I think they're going to hit our talking points and the big hot button issues about these episodes right off the bat. So let's go straight out of the gate here. Let's go 0 to 60. First question from Kate. Regarding episode 11, the Akka backstory. Please talk about your interpretation of what role/use Frill is to the show, the plot, the egg world and game, and the battle of the warriors of Thanatos and Eros. So we're going right in here. 0 to 60.
A big one.
Oh boy. Right. I have a theory. This is one of my cockadiddy whack job theories, but here's the thing, right? I am actually very much in broad agreement with you, Emily, that for the most part, like with stories like this, the mechanics of the world are things that you shouldn't obsess over in sense of, I want this to make sense. I want this to be a puzzle piece I can put together and get a broad picture. I want to understand everything.
I want to
mechanically now.
Make a wiki. About it.
I want to make a YouTube video explaining the ending of a film. In the sense of exactly what happened, like Annihilation. But anyway, here's the thing, right? Frill, to me, I need to put some things on the table first with this, because I did mention there was a comparison I read, because I think people could very rightly find the fact that Frill's existence in the show and what she means deeply offensive. Because we've had a show thus far that has been very much about the very individual circumstances, very complex personal issues that lead to suicide. And then, there's just this like little redheaded girl who's just like prodding and poking people from the other world that pushes them over the edge. That I can see as absolutely being read as deeply offensive and also kind of a betrayal of everything that's come before in the show. And I mentioned there was a comparison that I wanted to bring up that I'd seen floating around on Twitter, and that is with one of the worst anime I have ever seen, if not the worst. In fact, I will go on record as saying it's the worst. Babylon.
Wait a minute. That's not the show I thought you were going to say.
I've never seen it, so
Don't.
It's the the writer that wrote the same novel
Kado.
writer, right, that wrote Kado, The Right Answer, I think.
Yes.
But like
Never saw that either.
so
You've dodged bullets.
yeah,
there.
that one at least started promising. But
So did this one.
Oh,
So
did it? Okay,
Babylon.
I thought it was bad from the go. Or at least that's I'm going off hearsay. Like I haven't seen Babylon, but you think so Shield Hero superior to Babylon? This is what you're
Yes,
saying.
and I'll tell you
Oh
what-
my
and I'll tell you-
goodness!
No, I will tell
Shocker.
you why.
Elfin
I
Lead
will
superior to Babylon.
Yes, and I'll tell you why.
Man.
I'll tell you why. Because,
X-Arm. Okay, go ahead.
because Babylon has messaging in it, and its messaging basically is a couple of different things. One of which is that belief in God is the best way to not commit suicide. Women are the devil and will be the wrecking ball of all men everywhere. And if you
Yeah, I don't see the problem so
well,
far.
you've heard it. There we go. There we go. And lastly, and this is the thing that
Just
makes it the
dumb.
worst. This is the thing that makes it worse for me is that a character literally says something to the effect of people who have had suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts should remove themselves from the gene pool for the betterment of mankind.
Oh man,
Nice.
even just hearing you say the
And
words.
I am such a person who's felt that. And okay, that alone makes it a wretched, heinous piece of shit. But I need to go further with the comparison to Wonder Egg because there's actually a character in it. I cannot remember a name. I'm not rewatching Babylon. I've not rewatched Babylon to find this out because I won't do myself the actual harm in doing that. But basically, she is the titular whore of Babylon in this story, at least if not literally, then by implication. And she can literally make men kill themselves by going up to them and just like looking at them funny or whispering in their ear. And that is like she's the antagonist of the plot. The plot itself revolves around a discussion about what it means to like people want to commit suicide, at least like what it proposes to be, but in reality it's not, because again it's got that conservative Christian bollocks behind it about how people should conduct themselves to avoid these impure thoughts. But the comparison basically is that this lady, who I think her name might have been ironically enough, but
Really?
I can't remember. I think it might have been. I can't recall.
For some reason, the name
basically
Sybil is in my head because I've heard you talk about this before, but I don't think that's
No,
right.
I don't think it's Sybil, but it doesn't matter because the point is she is the equivalent of Frill. She is a force that can go around and force people to take their own life. And that was the comparison I saw. And here's the thing, right? I don't think that comparison is fair.
It is It's Magase. I remember
That's
now.
the one.
Yeah.
Yes. So
And
that's
by
Super
remember,
named.
by remember, I mean I checked my anime.
Thank you for that, Dom. Thank
Sure.
you for going. Thank you for using the internet to solve that. But basically, I don't think the comparison is fair because, for one, the men who killed themselves because of what I did in that show, it was never about their pain, their suffering. They were just the regular men, and she looks at them like sexily, and then they killed themselves for her. That was basically it. The girls in Wonder Egg, of course, we've seen them. We've seen their personal struggles. It has been very much, mostly, if not entirely, about their stories. So I don't think the comparison is necessarily fair. And also, I is literally a physical person in the physical world who can do this, whereas Frill, depending on your interpretation, isn't. So I've got that out of the way because I wanted to address that because that has come up, and however, I have to point out that if people still find Frill's role in showing what the implication of her presence means or problematic, then I will not argue with you because I can't say that you're wrong. Because I've found Babylon deeply upsetting for similar-ish reasons, like broadly similar ideas behind it. So who am I to say? But I want to get to my interpretation of what Frill means, and I'm going to put it down this way, which is, if you approach Frill strictly as a metaphorical character, which I think is actually a bit ironic given what happens to her, but hear me out. You have two men, two guys, for a laugh, creating their idealized image of a young girl. Even the name Frill seems to have that implication behind it, that idealized young lady. And they give her all of her attitudes. They impose all of that on her. Even the things what was it? Disobedience is the essence of femininity or something like that. That
Unpredictability,
line.
right? Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. Basically, they create what they believe is their idealized young girl for no other reason than they're bored. And then
line 22 of code: women be shopping. Next. So dumb.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what happens is that, and this is where things get a little murky, of course, like their creation, their own ideas bite them in the backside. And then they commit Frill to the other world where she then starts poisoning the thoughts of young girls of her age. And I read that, and this is me being charitable here, I read that as a metaphor for like men in society imposing on society, or at least societal like conventional like standards, their idea of a idealized like young girl, and how it's ultimately harming all of them, like either because they are taking noise or because it's just causing them mental anguish. And that's rather than it being literally the case that there is an AI girl who's caught in, this place that is allowing her to manipulate the minds of others. I think if you approach it more as a concept of we're forcing this idealized, vision of a young girl on all young girls, either directly or indirectly, it is doing them harm as a result. That's my very charitable interpretation. I don't know if it holds any water, but it's about the best I can come up with that otherwise doesn't make me go, wow, that's all crock of shit this is, isn't it?
Right. So we were talking about the same thing earlier. So this is what Steve at Vestnet on ANN, he talked about a similar-ish kind of way to salvage the Frill character. And I think it's a noble attempt. And I think, if it works for folks, of course that's totally fine. For me, I don't know, like the fact that kind of systemic oppression is like personalized in a character who is like, I don't know, just taking these actions that either totally or like in part cause these young women to commit suicide in the show. Like, I don't know, it just doesn't sit well with me. Like it really troubled me because that it just seems like such a personal thing, and we have examined in deep, messy detail like the kind of the motivations and the mindsets and the all the stuff about women that take their own lives through for all different kinds of reasons, undergoing pain, their different kinds of pain, their own personal pain. And I don't know, to then kind of come over the top and sort of say, like, it's this supervillain that's doing it.
Yeah.
And even if and of course she, I don't think the show casts her as a supervillain. I mean, I do think that like her sort of the tragedy of the character is that like she's the making of these two asshole dudes, and their terribleness. And so I don't think she's like at fault, even if like, she is the how do you call it? The efficient the efficient cause of something happening, as Aristotle would say. She's not the final cause, right? Like that will be the Akkas, but like she's the one going and making it happen, right? That like that is kind of how I ultimately like read her by the end of the episode, like what was happening with Haruka and everything. I think her name is it Haruka? That's the daughter of the Akka and
Himari?
Mrs. Akka?
Himari.
Himari, not Haruka, sorry. Haruka is another girl from the show, Momo's friend, but Himari, yes. I don't know, that's how I read all that, and it like I just didn't I didn't vibe with it. But the character herself, I mean, apart from that, I mean, it's just unbelievably tragic, and like I think demonstrates quite well just patriarchy and dudes like putting women in these boxes, right? That if and in these categories that are of their own making, and really restricting. I mean, like it's so interesting to me that like at no point does Frill like try to escape the Akka's clutches when she clearly could.
She actually couldn't, and I'll tell you. I'll tell you why. Because of the background detail when I can't remember which one it was. I visited him the second time. The hatch in the little coffin place she was put in was actually weighed down.
But she
it
had
was
all
in the background. You'd have missed it, but yeah,
but she had all the
was, like, weighed
cables.
down.
Well, all those cables were snaking out. That I mean, surely she did that. I don't think the Akkas did that. You know what I mean?
It's a magical world. I took that as a metaphor for her like infesting the world and like
Sure.
trying to branch out. I didn't literally think like, oh god, like did she get them from Amazon or whatever? Like I'm gonna order all these all of these power strips next day delivery. I just want to address some quick points of yours there, Doc, which is
Okay.
you actually said to me on a previous episode that we did of this where you said you thought it was going to be a big bad. And the reason I think that this is like also why I now retroactively don't like the Persona franchise as much anymore, because big bads are inherently reductive. Like, oh, we beat this bad guy and everything's solved and we're all done. Yay, cool. But I do agree. I do think like that if it is going to be Frill in the end, this is ultimately why I think the final episode's not going to feel 13 that is in June is going to feel as good or satisfying as the one we just watched, because it's we're solving the mechanical problem, not the emotional one anymore.
Well, I just want to at least stick up for big bads. I think they might be reductive when you're having like a psychodrama, but like in some contexts they're good. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
What is the question that follows this? Because I want to see if they tie in together before I give my answer.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
The question after this is about the final egg girl, which would be I, and final egg boss, which would be Sawaki, and how this battle impacts your understanding of I, her mom, and Sawaki as characters.
Okay, cool. So that kind of ties into what I'll talk about. So I'll just talk about those things together. I have already said that I could care less about the mechanics of everything, because I feel like if you're using, again, specifically with how much this series has paid attention to cinematography, its own cinematography and its lighting, and having this entire secondary visual language in florography, which I guess I'm not meaning this to sound like any sort of humble brag, but if it wasn't meant for that, then the director wouldn't have retweeted one of my posts on it. So I do think that there is like a very purposeful application of flower language in this. And interestingly enough, episode 11 is the most bookendy version of that, where they take a lot of visual things that they had previously applied throughout the rest of the show. Like, for example, leading this episode off with the conclusion of Rika's fighting was really purposeful, because she's the one who has had the flower field that changes based on what kind of emotion they want to convey, but also changes the flowers themselves change color, which changes the meaning of them based on the lighting. And we see that applied to Frill. So it's basically setting you up to view this in a really coherent and kind of bookendy way with concepts they introduced in the first 2 to 3 episodes visually. So from that kind of narrative standpoint of what it seems to be trying to get the viewer to do, episode 11 is really interesting to me, but I don't think it's particularly successful. And I think if they were going to, and this could be I'm not making excuses for it, but because I do think they always plan to introduce Frill. I don't think she's an afterthought by any means.
Oh goodness.
But if they were planning on introducing her, and maybe this ties into the scheduling issues that they obviously had with such a small team, you kind of hint at that earlier. 11 in particular, when we're talking about the Akkas, when we're talking about the explanation of concepts, it's that having this kind of episode where it's almost in a vacuum, right? Where like, as my friend who I watched episode 12 with pointed out, like I didn't even ask really, like the one of the Akkas just starts like info dumping on her. It is that like pretty much is that you have everything like weirdly self-contained, and even with the visual language trying to loop it back into what the series started, it's not matching up. So if you wanted to use a mechanic like this, it should have been hinted at earlier, because isolating it in one episode not only kind of makes it seem like it's coming out of the blue and kind of like a really unnecessary explanation when it comes to the girls' emotional narratives, but it additionally makes it so that like these characters who we already didn't really like because they're arbiters, they're there to keep the status quo in place, they're there to profit off of, you know, young women's pain and suicidal ideation for their own goals, and like that was already hinted at. I thought it was very explicitly said, actually, both through their actions and also through the visual language. But so having an entire episode of that seems superfluous, because like, did anyone come out of this feeling like they really felt bad for the Akkas? You know, man, like they just got a bad break. Women be crazy. Like, no, everyone was coming out of this episode being like, what the fuck, dudes? Like, why? Like, you were
Jesus,
bored?
yeah.
Like, seriously? So
For the
and
shit
like,
stand dog giggles.
yeah, and
Yeah.
like that kind of seems superfluous when you think about how they've already been set up, right? At least to me. So like spending an entire episode on this where they're just these weird, unreliable narrators, and they come across as just awful, even when describing their own backstory in presumably the most sympathetic way that they can think to convey it, is like, it's like, okay, we already thought you were kind of shit, and now we definitely think you're shit. Like so so that in that like way, it makes it seem really extraneous to me. So I'm trying to explain why like I really do care about the mechanics. And then with episode 12 is really interesting, because if you're looking at it as a, and this is where like again, I have a lot of people disagreeing with me on Sawaki, because I feel like unlike the Akkas, people really wanted to believe that he was like this very good and pure person, and it goes from people thinking he's like awful and evil to people thinking he's like the best thing ever, and it's explained away by everything that happens in this episode. But one thing I want to point out first before going into like what I think it is that if you go back to Minami, for example, who's the second girl that Ai saves, right? So in comparison to the first girl she saves, Minami is really unsure of herself. She praises Ai for like being able to do her own thing, aka be a shut-in,
Right.
because she's so scared of like breaking out of her own routine that she you know, she tries to not go to rhythmic gymnastics for one day, but then ends up going anyway. And that's her like big attempt at trying to break out of her own shell. Like you would never go back to Minami and her wonder killer, who was extremely awful, and definitely ties into this really weird idea of like, love is pure and good when you're younger, but as women get older, as they age, they suddenly become gross, and they're you know, they're manipulative, and et cetera, et cetera. There's been that through line since and I'm not saying the show is saying this, I'm saying the show is saying this attitude is bad.
Yeah.
And it gets introduced in that like kind of second episode really clearly through Minami. The reason why I'm bringing up Minami is because you wouldn't go back and say to her, even though she's, you know, you sit there and she's apologizing for her inadequacies, and anyone who's been abused by someone who's in a position of authority or power over them knows how this works, right? Where they are at some point praising you, but most of the time they're kind of manipulating you and trying to keep you down. And there's not like a clear cut, like if people, most of the time, as someone who has dealt with this in personal relationships a lot, in the past, most of the time people aren't bad all the time, right? Like the system doesn't work if you're bad all the time. You have to have there's good in there at the same time. To point out one of the best characters at this, actually, I'm not gonna. This is like a new tennis spoiler, so I guess like block your ears. It's not like a. I guess it kind of is a major one, but like when you're looking at the dichotomy of like good and evil in a person, even like a prince isn't suddenly a terrible person when they lose their innocence. They just get colored in this really weird gray area. So I'll just leave it at that. That's very vague, but anyone who's watched Utena can
do it.
Knows who I'm talking about. But you would never go back to Minami and be like, okay, you very obviously had respect for this woman who was your superior, who was very obviously abusive to you. We know that the Wonder Killers, from watching Sawaki throughout the series and then watching Sawaki in the Alter Eyes world as a Wonder Killer, that the Wonder Killers are very like bombastic versions of what happens in life, right? So this person is not doing these things. They're not bad all the time. But there's like that it turns something that's like gray into something that's very like evil, I guess, if that makes sense. Or like outwardly bombastically evil. You would never go back to Minami and say your gym teacher was actually treating you really well, right?
Yeah.
And so like that is where I have
this Wonder Killer
with...
is just like a manifestation of your doubt.
Yeah,
that's
I mean. Where. So like, I don't take issue with the final episode, but I do think that, and I know I've been like ripped apart on Reddit for saying that Sawaki is still a bad person. I don't think you would also go back and say like, I'm shocked. I don't think you would also go back. I mean, it's up. Like I think it's by design that happens, right? Because you want to believe that he's good. I wanted to believe that Akio is good in Utena too. Like that, I went through this whole like transformation of like how I interpreted stories and fairy tales after watching Utena, and it's great. It's fantastic. I love it. So like, and I don't think the final episode exonerates him either, right? And I also don't think it makes him a really terrible person. It does, however, point out that like, just like you would never go back to Minami and say your gym teacher wasn't abusing you, just like you'd never go back to any of the young women that Momoe saved and tell them these people weren't abusing you. You would, because if you look at like Karu's story, for example, his story sucks, right? It's shit.
You're not going to
go
back.
Yeah, you're not gonna go back to Karu and be like, yo, like maybe they were a good person after all. So I think that's where like I see a narrative through line that I really like when you're examining how people have influence over you.
Yeah.
And ultimately, to kind of go forward to Ai's relationship with her, I really loved that part, because I think when you're looking at sorry if I'm talking too much, by the way, but if you're looking at like the way that Koito is placed, right? The Neru actually says it best when she's like she was kind of a false friend. Like there's this idea that we have to try to figure out how much Koito actually meant to Ai, and it just so happens that she was the first person to befriend her. There's this very clear feeling coming out of episode 12 that it could have been anyone, right? Like it could have been anyone who was just there. Just someone else who was there for Ai.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone, literally anyone. Because the Ai that didn't have someone in Koito, ended up not being able to see her own mother's love for her. So it's like her mom was always there as well, but it took that extra person to make that connection, right? Because when all this stuff happens to Koito, Ai ends up seeing how much her mother really cares about her, despite the fact that her mother obviously has no idea how to deal with what Ai's going through, right? She doesn't really know how to approach her about it. She tries to talk to her about it, and it's very weird and awkward, especially with Sawaki there. So yeah, this is all a rambling thing to say that like the way that the series has framed Sawaki and framed Ai and framed her mom, I think the emotional conclusion that Ai comes to in the very end by being able to talk to her, essentially herself, who didn't have just any one friend in high school. It ends up being like really, really poignant, very emotionally affecting, to be quite honest.
Like one eye got lucky, right? And the other didn't.
And I really liked the way that it says like it can be anything that does it, because like I don't know if you guys, I don't know if I have to put like a trigger warning on this, because I've shared this publicly. I shared it on Crunchyroll when I was writing about Orange. But the thing that stopped me from killing myself was getting swine flu. Like it wasn't anyone's existence. It was swine flu. It was, I was just lying there with fever because I was like planning on doing it. And I was just like lying there, I think watching football and on the couch with like 103-degree fever. And my family was off at a Christmas thing in Connecticut. And I was at home in Massachusetts. And I was just thinking like, wow, my body's really fighting hard to keep me alive. Like maybe I should also do that, but mentally. So like it doesn't have to be like any one like big thing. It can be something very subtle. And that's where I think the existence of Koito is really interesting to me, because there is this sense that yes, it could have literally been anyone, just anyone to be present. And in that way, like Koito is both a false friend and like a very true one, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. I'll just add some things to what you said there. First of which is I just want to go back to episode 11 and talk about the whole like flashback thing, which is there's an element that props up in this, and I know we said like about not talking about mechanics, but so you'll have to correct me on this if I'm getting this very specific point out of the way. But if you recall that Ai picks up like a document which shows like an uptick graph of suicide rates, or at least it's pointed out at some point that that's been happening since Frill was incarcerated. Now, we can argue whether or not that's actually true. Because again, this is from the Aka's perspective. It is, as you say, unreliable narration. But there's something about that rubbed me the wrong way. And this is not because of anything to do with like whether or not that's true in real life or not. But I felt like, and this really, I think, also helps illustrate the issue with putting the Frill plotline in this show to begin with, because it feels like a quantitative like problem. Like, the numbers are going up. We must solve the numbers. But the thing that Wonder Egg has been most powerful about, and has rightly pointed out, is that the reasons for suicide are complex, they are varied, and they're deeply, deeply personal. So I felt really like I didn't know how to take that. I was like, is this all bullshit? Like, is this just their justification for doing all this crap? But to me, I think it only just helps like codify like why, even if I could put that theory forward of like, hey, Frill is meant to represent like a poisonous conception of like, girlhood on girls kind of thing, that whole stuff I saw before. Like even that, it still feels like this, it feels really odd. The other thing as well is that the very personal story of the Akas, like, and what happens to Asuza in particular, and then Himari, like, that to me, like, feels like it doesn't work with the conceptual element, because that means that, these things still happen to them, but then Frill is meant to be treated conceptually, but then it just makes a kind of wave between the actual person and more of a metaphorical concept, which, I don't know, it just feels messy, I think is the way. I think it needed more work, as you said, definitely some more setup earlier in the show. The Other thing I'll say now is, since we moved on to the question, which I'll just restate for the benefit of everyone. In fact, Doc's just returned, so I'll re-mention the second question from Kate, which is episode 12. How did you interpret the final egg girl and the final egg boss, that being Ai and Sawaki, and how this last battle impact your understanding of Ai, her mom, and Sawaki Sensei as characters? Right. Okay. I mentioned before at the very beginning, or near the beginning of this podcast, that I found episode 12 really, really emotionally affecting. You yourself said it was profound, Emily, and I agree with you, because I mean, you've offered your honest thoughts, your honest history here, and I will do so as well. Which is, I went to therapy for suicidal ideation. I had at the time, and for a long time prior to that, thought of many horrific ways that I wanted to take my own life. I never did. I'm still here, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm also a lot better now. Those thoughts are pretty much gone. Therapy does work wonders. Give it a try.
I think I speak for the whole of the listenership when I say I'm grateful that that's the case for both of you.
Indeed. I'm very much glad that all of us are here to do this. But here's the thing, right? What I'm about to say, I must stress, is very much my personal perspective. And I'm not going to say that this message I'm about to talk about is wrong or wasted, or the people were telling me this was, bad. It came from a good place. But when I was going through that awful time, I would often hear a message to the effects of, it'll get better. And I never once believed it. It never once stuck with me or made me feel like it actually would be true. It was too abstract. It felt to me, I felt like asking back, oh, how? How does this get better? Give me some concrete examples of what will actually change to make my life better. And obviously that's too much to ask of that person. They're trying to help. I understand that. But it never works for me, that message. And I can't speak for other people. Maybe they've heard that message too and they feel similarly to how I did. Maybe they thought, no, I'm glad to be reassured for it. But then this episode 12, comes along, and an implication dawned on me. I think what happens here is that we have this message being delivered in such a way that it actually finally made sense to me, and it kind of caught me completely off guard, which is our Ai, that is the one we've seen throughout the show, tells a version of herself who's taken her own life, it will get, you will get better. I have friends, and we've seen that all the way through this show's run, how she has actually, gotten stronger. It's not been easy. She's still struggled with her own personal issues with Sawaki. Like, it's not been a completely bump-free ride. It's not been smooth sailing, but it has gotten better. It's been incremental for her. She has more friends now. And her telling that to the version of herself where she thought it will not, she was so stuck in that mindset, it will never get better, to the point where she took her own life. And we have all the proof of the entire show that came before it. It felt to me like that message being portrayed in such a way that it actually felt really powerful. It didn't feel like force, because it's not like the reverse where we have Ai meets Ai from the future before she kills herself, and I said, no, it's going to get better. We're not going to show you any of it, but it'll get better. I promise. Like, no, we've seen all the struggles she's been through. This point she reaches now, where she tells her a different part of herself, a side of herself from a different timeline. It will get better, and we have all the evidence that we've seen as the audience to back that up. And it really, really hit me when I thought that. I was like, this is the first time that message has ever, to my memory, been told to me through media, and I thought, holy shit, I get it.
I think it's even.
Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was gonna say I think it's even better than that, because again, I think Minami is such a really good parallel for Ai and Alter Ai talking about Sawaki and Koito, because already in Minami's episode where Minami faces down her gym teacher, right? And I think it's really, that episode's really important. If you want to point to another one that's really good about that, Rika with the cult leader one is another one that's really, really good in regards to someone who is obviously has a lot of love or respect for this person who is also having a very negative impact on their life. I think that it's not even that it gets better, but the most important thing, I think that I've been calling them Triangle Eye and XI based on because the way you tell them apart is their beret, right? Their hair
Cryo,
beret.
there you go.
Or beret, sorry. Beret. The most poignant thing that she tells her is that my mom always was there for me, right? Like she never, she always supported me, and that's why I want to be able to get over whatever feelings I have about Sawaki so that she can be happy. I think in that moment isn't even necessarily telling her like it gets better. She's telling her like it always was this always was like the case. This love was like always around you actually.
Yes.
So even though I like can't stop you, I obviously can't stop you. This already happened. I can tell you that, regardless, like you were loved even back then. And I think that's a really, really fucking powerful
That's great.
thing to say.
You're
really
100% right. I think I freely admit my blindness to that, given my relationship with my own mother. But I 100% agree with your assessment of that. And yeah, I agree. Like it is incredibly powerful. Like, and this everything you've just said, Emily, building on what I've just said, I think ties into what you yourself said before, and I agree with, which is it would not have been the end of the world if the show had ended here, because it is an amazing, amazing personal like arc for I, and also just a great note for the show's finish on, a note of positivity for people who have been through similar to what she's been through, like a way that I think actually really feels like it sinks in and like isn't something that just deflects off you, like yeah.
But what about all the men whose plot threads are not? I kid. No, but the only thing. What about the Akkas and their amazing backstory?
It's just me whispering, "Who cares?" in the background.
No, I kid. No, it is. I think the other three of the Egg Quartet being sidelined to such a great degree makes me hesitant to say that I'm okay with this being a finale, because I mean I was really invested in all of them. Yeah, and I want to see more resolution in regard to. I want to see something, right? I mean, there's not just sort of loose story threads, but there's like just open conflict that is like, what is gonna happen? You know what I mean? There's a really huge thing. So like, but from the point of view of I mean, it's thinking back on it and thinking about how you guys are reading it. I mean, it's hard to think of like a better conclusion for her, honestly. So I'm
sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, I want to talk about. I want to respond to something that Emily was saying for the last question. I will answer the current question we're on, I promise. But I just want to echo something she said and just put my own 2 cents out there about it, because I think this is me repeating myself again. But I think that the way that the show depicts abusers is incredible. Is not, of course, that abuse existing is incredible, obviously, but like the very honest, like authentic portrayal and lens it gives to sort of what those people are like is I think to be commended, because like she said, I mean, if only all abusers looked to our eyes like wonder killers, I mean, the world would be much easier to get along in place, because we could easily identify them and stop them and know what was going on. But, they're very oftentimes have these good qualities, not just handsomeness or being great artists or well-spoken. Like, they are sometimes kind to different people, sometimes all kinds of good things, right? But yet and still, I think we have to square that with the reality that the way that these kinds of people are depicted in this show as wonder killers is also true. Like, that darkness is also in there. Those behaviors, those not just the thoughts and because it would be one thing if like the wonder killers were just like representative of like thoughts they were having, but like I very much interpreted them as like these things when they're talking about like raping a girl, that really happened to the girl or the boy that they were talking about. And so I do think that like by and large these are pretty awful people, but they're allowed to be awful by these institutions that let it happen to young women and young men, and that is like such a tragedy. And it's like I think it's all really well told in this show. And I think the people that like want to like exonerate Sawaki are just like, honestly, I think they're deluding themselves. Like straight up. I mean, you cannot look at episode 12 in isolation. I mean, you just simply can't. Like if you look at every other Wonder Killer, like you said, the Minami one, great example. The Kaoru one, great example. You're not gonna go to them and tell them that they're wrong about these things, that these people are really, they're okay, they're fine, they're good. Like, no.
I just want to add, I defy anyone to look at Sawaki's like abomination of a painting with the title Latent Heat and think,
Latent Heat.
That's fine.
Latent.
The only way that thing would be the only way that fucking atrocity would be worse is if it were an NFT. Honestly,
it's pretty gross. Yeah,
it's real bad.
It's disgusting. But I want to just add to
the
your
two
point
with the flowers.
Yeah,
Jesus. When I read your piece about what they meant, like it was
gross.
stomach turning.
Yeah.
I just want to add to your point though, Doc, about the presentability of like these kind of people. This is also why, to me, at least conceptually, Sawaki is an artist. Like he's an artist written as one, because he very much, not only does he actually do the act of painting, but he portrays himself in such a way, and in turn paints a world, like for I at least, like that she feels compelled to be a part of. And this is also why the final, like in the actual fight, of course, the final attack that he does is the one where he drops that blue ink into the water. Water, by the way, has also been used a couple of times throughout these episodes as kind of like a transition between life and death, which also fits in here. So I thought that was really neat. They kept that, like, it wasn't just a thing he does, because there's any number of ways. Like, I mean, obviously the painting, as we just discussed, is very effective in, at least as it should be, in getting across what a vile person he is. But it's not just simply that it's it's not purely functional. Like, it also goes to show like the ultimate expression of how he can control, like, the way he presents himself, the world around him. He doesn't literally paint, to make people think different things. But he in a sense kind of like, portrays like himself in the way he does.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Shadon, because like he's not just having this conversation with I mean, I think he's having it with the audience. You know what I mean? Like, well, it seems like you too have fallen from my public face. It's really nice to be born handsome, huh? You can get away with a lot.
Oh, by the way, nice visual touch in episode 12. You can tell all the scenes in which, once he's dropped that blob of blue paint, which are the dream world that he has created, this this illusion, because all of the color grading is deeply blue, shades of blue, following the drop of blue ink he put in there. So you can immediately visually distinguish between them.
The show's brilliant with colors. Like I said, that's one thing that episode 11 does really well. It's like presents basically the not conclusion, I guess is the wrong word, but like the bookending of its of the way it's been using visual language the entire time.
Yeah.
So do you guys think? Do you guys think, while we're talking about Sawaki, so episode 12 obviously introduces the parallel worlds conceit, and
doesn't episode 7? What was Nadu's episode that actually introduced the?
Yeah, it's been mentioned before. Conceit. Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah. The Kotobuki and Nadu episode.
Oh, that's that number 8. She talked about
the world line.
Right. Well, that just sort of seemed like, the manic pixie dream girl scientist talking her stuff. Like, I don't, but it's like, but I'll grant your point. I'll just, let me amend my statement then and say, like, the parallel world theory is shown to be actually true for this world. Right here, definitely for sure in this episode. Like, it smacks us in the face because I meets I. And so you have two eyes, and the Wonder Killer for Parallel World Eye is Sawaki. Like, I could see someone maybe trying to, and this is a very mechanical argument here, Emily, but like someone, saying, "Hey, look, this whole deal with Sawaki and 12 was just about like the Sawaki in that world line. It doesn't apply to the true, actual Sawaki that we are acquainted with in this one," which I think is like wrong. But like,
I can tell you it's wrong.
Well,
Okay.
I
I can
mean,
tell you that I can prove it. I can prove it with something that actually happens in that fight. Ai is trying to hit him with her giant pen, and she's saying, "No, the real Sawaki is nice and whatnot and all this." And he's telling her otherwise, and her
Mhm.
attacks are completely ineffective while she's saying that. It's only when she accepts the truth of who he is that she ends up defeating him. So bear in mind, this is our Ai, from the prime time, whatever you want to call it, I don't know. This is why I don't like mechanics, so you get tied with timeline shit. But like,
triangle eye.
yeah.
Go with the Barrettes, triangle eye and X eye.
Okay.
I versus AUI.
Oh God. Anyway, I can point to that and say like, no, this is literally just the same. Like, and moreover, there's also no evidence to say that he's any like different or whatever. It's just, oh God.
Do you think she?
So like going back to if you're ignoring what the show is telling you explicitly and looking at how it's showing you explicitly that's why I think Minami's episode is like so important as a almost like Rosetta Stone for the way that we look at Wonder Killers and the way that we look at how you fight them, is that it's not until Minami accepts that it's not entirely her fault that Ai is able to fight and defeat the Wonder Killer properly. Like, it's not without Minami's help,
The buy-in,
and her accepting what happened, that she's able to defeat it. And so I think in that regard, it really sets up this precedent that remains true for every single Wonder Killer, is that you need to accept the truth of the situation. You need to absolve yourself of your own like blame or self-disgust or whatever is going on in order to fight it properly. Because I can't, and I think this is also really important, right? I when she's fighting off other Wonder Killers, she can't just come in. Again, this is why I think Minami's episode is so important. She can't just come in as like super cool girl with a weapon and she's defeating everything and like, she's super badass and et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's not what happens. Even though Minami thinks that initially, she comes in, she thinks that, okay, you're so cool, you can save me from this. Even if she's not explicitly saying that, there's kind of this hero worship that happens almost immediately, and still Ai is not able to defeat it without Minami's help from her rhythmic gymnastics actual ribbon turning into a weapon that helps, and also her giving Ai really explicit direction as to like duck here, dodge here, go this way, go that way, because she can't see. So I think in that regard, it sets that stage up really well for the two Ais fighting Sawaki side by side.
Yeah. Also, just as a reminder, latent heat.
I know, right?
I mean, like, know how
exactly. Like,
yes.
I agree. I mean, the framing of the character all throughout has been very sinister and foreboding. And I mean, specifically, really, this will be so fast, Emily, and then you can chime in. I just wanted to say that I just really do think that the show is, in episode 12, very explicit that, like, I mean, these are parallel worlds, but like, it's still the same people. Like, there's not, we're not talking like a Cable Age of the Apocalypse like timeline difference. It's like, these two people married and like this other person's totally different. It's not like they're the same people. I here is I there, and that's like that's why everything that happens is so heartening for her, because the person
Yeah,
with
that's why the whole thing with her
yeah,
mom hit.
it makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Because it's her, right, and it applies to her life. So like I think we can transpose that similitude onto the Sawakis that exist in these different parallel worlds. But go ahead, Emily.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I think it's actually so important though that Sawaki is so vague because, again, like to my
Sure,
earlier point about
sure.
abusers, but then even like to go back to Utena and like my kind of like mind blown moments about that and storytelling is that like for a vast majority of the show, like I wanted it to end, or like my expectations for it ending were going to be, you know, Utena is going to, you know, make him see the light and turn good, and you know he's going to be a prince again, and everything's going to be, you know, that's how things typically end, and that's not how it ends.
Mm-hmm.
Spoilers. It ends in an amazing, so much better way.
It does.
That is just awesome, but at the same time really challenges you to think about these kind of things, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Wonder Egg Priority does nearly as good of a job as Utena, but
Oh no,
I do think
no,
that
it's not
it
good, sure.
I do think that it's really cool that we're having this conversation about Sawaki, right? And like I think that it's important that people want him to be good, you know, like you desperately want him to be good, and I think that is a really key part of his character.
Yeah, and by that same token, I think it is also super important that he was explicitly revealed in 12 to be a Wonder Killer, so that the people that did want either not see or willingly kind of want to not see what we all saw can go back and look at it and be like, oh, it was there. Like, this is what, like, and then like take what is shown about Sawaki, like, okay, so Sawaki's a Wonder Killer, but we've seen everything about his life. Like, there's plausible deniability. There's kind of this vagueness about him being a predator. I mean, I think we can then like apply it to like every other one of the Wonder Killers and be like, you know, again, like I think it's just a very important thing for people to think about and sit with, that that this is kind of more of an authentic portrait of someone like that, you know, than a more simplistic one. But what's our next question, Shadon? I'm sorry, no, do you have something more to say?
I'll add one thing to say, and I'll repeat what I said on the previous part as well. Is this isn't just happening in fiction, of course. There are actual real world consequences to people in authority presenting themselves as, you know, respectable individuals who then abuse their power to abuse people. I mean, again, Sarah Everard in the UK, this woman who was murdered, presumably not been proven in court yet, but murdered by a police officer, you know. Mm-hmm. Also, I could name other instances, but yeah, it again this is why the show is also, say, very relevant. It is because there are people like Sawaki out there, and one may wonder then that maybe some of the vehement defenses of him that you've heard of, Emily, might be because it cuts too close to the bone for some people. Perhaps, maybe I'm speculating wildly and rampantly here, but yeah, it's worth remembering that there are people like that out there. And with very real consequences as a result. It's not just simply something that happens in this safe fictional space.
No, wait, man. My uncle's like him. Oh, wait.
Oh dear. All right, next question. This one comes from Rackham Extreme. Sorry, I have to say extreme like that. It's the law. And I think we may have already covered some of this, so I apologize if we have to abridge some answers here, but the first of it is, do you think that the suggestion that Frill might have helped encourage or increase some of the suicides in any way hurts the show's theme, overall message, or quality, as opposed to if she didn't have a hand in them? I'm just going to put it out there. I've already talked about this in some length, so I'm just going to say that I think that for the most part, one could eject Frill from the show entirely, and I don't think it would negatively harm it.
Yeah, we were joking. So me and the other friend I was watching the show with, we were joking that we're gonna get like there are at least two other of our friends that are really interested in watching this. They were gonna wait until the end, and then watch it in its entirety. But now I think what we're going to do is have a marathon prior to the finale. But we were like, yeah, you can skip the recap episode and you can skip the episode 11. That's kind of like a half joke thing, because you can theoretically take that out and have the same emotional narrative conclusions. I've already also talked about how Frill is to some extent extraneous, but I also do think, because it does seem like the actual finale is because I's emotional narrative ends here, right? Think or not ends, but you know what I mean, like it comes to a very logical conclusion.
Yeah.
I think that by that logic, we can infer that episode 13 is going to deal with a lot more of the in-world mechanics and stuff that episode 11 introduced. So in that regard, the question is going to remain unanswered for me until I see that episode.
Yeah, I already have had money on it basically playing out the exact same way as the final boss fight from the pacifist run of Undertale. You know it.
It's been too long. I don't remember exactly what that's like.
But honestly, like, I is gonna get the shit kicked out of her by Frill, and I literally think you could just have a little white text box that comes up and says, "But it refused." You know it.
Right.
I know it. It's going to be the exact same thing. It's going to be Asriel Dreamer all over again. Do you have anything else to add to that question, Doc?
Well, I mean, I think yes is my answer. I mean, I strongly dislike the whole like temptation of death as like a world mechanic when applied to like, teen suicide. Like, it just is not. It's not what I'm into. It's not what I signed up for. It's not what I signed up for of this story.
I'm not vibing with it.
Not vibing with this at all. Like, I mean, I think it just seems to like cut against like what the show had done up to that point, when exploring the pain of other people. That. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really easy, given what the show has like the foundation of the first 10 episodes, like that message is almost already there, that there's like like in addition to whatever personal pain and kind of individual tragedies that are happening to these young women, there's a layer of institutional kind of patriarchal oppression. I feel like that's already been established. Like, you don't need like Frill to be like the manifestation of that concept to bring that home. Yeah. So
yeah, I agree. And I'll just end my. I'll move on to the next question in a second, but I'll just mention again, just to reiterate. I feel currently a bit neutral on it. Like, I think this theory that I came up with before could be a thing, but as you rightly pointed out there, Doc, it's not strictly speaking necessary. It's still messily implemented. And more to the point, and what's really important here is that's my reaction. If you, listener at home, wherever you may be catching this, may think so, I don't agree. I think it's horrible. I think it's wretched. And I think it undercuts the show entirely. You're right. It's not for me or anyone else to like say to you, your interpretation of this is wrong. That person who came with that comparison with Babylon, for example, I don't agree with the comparison, but I do understand the sentiment that it is still, if you read it in that particular way, which is a valid reading, like deeply troubling, as you say. So, yeah.
I mean, like, imagine a show that for like 4/5 of its runtime was like about exploring the reasons that couples, like people that were once in love, drift apart, fall out of love, and then, commit like affairs of the heart or physical affairs or whatever. And then you find out what actually happened was off-screen Cupid was shooting them with arrows.
Oh, you mean Darling in the Franxx?
It just sort of is. It's very similar to like what they're doing, and it's just super annoying.
To Darling in the Franxx.
I knew it. I'm sorry. When I was describing that, I was like, nope, it just fits.
I'm just no-selling you. I'm pretending you didn't say that. It's totally
That's
no sodium.
fine. That's fine. I'm gonna remove it from my own memory laced with copious amounts of rum. Okay, next question. Do you think they could have handled some of the themes addressed in the last episode with the introduction of victims from a parallel worlds, such as Kaito being in the egg instead? Or do you feel the way they did it was best/necessary? For me, I think it works because it is like the parallel worlds thing. I think that the honest answer I have to, the way I describe this is, don't worry about it. As Emily said, who cares? The parallel worlds thing. This is also, for example, why I would very much encourage people not to get obsessed with the fact that Frill is an artificial intelligence. Doesn't matter. Who cares? You know, it is a label, but it is not something you should obsess over the details thereof. Like the parallel worlds thing is just a method for which I can talk to a different version of herself to have this emotional like resolution. How that whole works is completely and utterly superfluous to its actual goal of we need to make this or allow this to happen. That's what's important. So
it's like the
don't
Evangelion ending, right? I mean, it's like, don't worry about why they're all talking to each other in this weird liminal space and that's spacey wacy and timey wimey. Just like what matters is like the dialogue and like the what's happening.
I would say I think it only like I don't care about the parallel worlds thing either. I think honestly just even mentioning it in a previous episode is enough for it to be like, okay, that's a thing. But I think the whole narrative thrust behind it is really good. And in that regard, I think it only could have been I who came out of the egg because I needed to, in order for her, like, her emotional narrative had already concluded, sort of, but she wasn't aware of that, right? Like, she'd already become this person who was a lot more aware of her own feelings, who, even after fighting with her friends, is someone who's like, yeah, I have friends and they're great, actually. Is someone who's always really quick to forgive and to trust people, and that gets taken advantage of in some cases, even by one of her friends, Rika. As much as I love Rika, like I fucking love her, but like
I knew you would.
initially that is their relationship, right? So like I think it's really important for her to recognize how far she's come, and in addition to figure out that the question she wanted answered wasn't necessarily why did Koito commit suicide, but why did, because it's heavily implied that they may have been considering either doing it together or doing it like considering it simultaneously, right? Through visuals.
Right.
Whether it's Alter Eye or her herself, in both cases they had suicidal ideation, right? So I no offense, Koito, love the idea that it literally could have been anyone, right? Like as Nedu says, like she was a fake friend. She was there. And they both had a crush on the same guy, and she just kind of existed, but her existence was enough in that case for I to view things just slightly differently. And so the question she wanted answered wasn't necessarily why did Koito commit suicide, even though yes she does, but also why did I want to, and what made me consider this. And in that regard, again, I think it only could have been I, because Koito theoretically could have been anyone. So it was a lot less about her and a lot more about I having a conversation with herself. And in that regard, I don't care about it took Parallel World to make that happen, because it happened and the conversation was like so fucking good that
Hell yeah.
I just don't care.
Whatever
100%.
the means. Whatever the means. I read a theory on Reddit recently that said Koito
Doesn't exist.
was not real. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what
I don't mind that theory either. I actually think this episode above all other episodes gives like the most credence to that.
Sure.
But yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
I don't think. I also don't think that is the case. But
yeah.
in
Well,
terms of
but
like interpreting the show that way,
well, sure. Well, I
can see
guess,
it.
but beyond whether or not it's plausible, like I'm not sure that I like the implication. I think it might weaken like everything that you just said if you know, because if Koito's an imaginary friend, that's like a choice, a quote unquote strength that I had to manufacture her. Whereas the alter I who ended up killing herself didn't make that choice. And I, like you, like the fact that it was not something of her own doing. It was random chance and luck that brought Koito into her orbit at that time. And because, like, that, I think, makes what
Well, I think
like I1 says to I2 matter so much more, and says like, you know, I'm not strong like you. And like, yes, like you are me. Like you can like you could do this, you know?
I think when I'm considering the idea that Koito is not real, I'm also considering a lot of what happens in Wonder Egg Priority by extension to not be real, and therefore like XI or like alter I would be the quote unquote like real
The real
I.
I. Oh no.
So yeah,
You
like
flipped it on its
that would
head.
be yeah, no, like I mean that's a cool interpretation of the show too. Like I totally think that's a valid look. Because then it would be like her thinking through and coming to the conclusion again that she was strong this entire time and she was surrounded by love this entire time, and she tells herself that through another version of herself.
I see.
There's also like we haven't really talked about this, but there is also the weirdness of like the one thing that is really interesting to me at the conclusion of this episode is not, oh, I'm going to become a warrior of Eros, or oh, I'm going to fight the Akkas or whatever, but it's like the whole like who is I at the end after her eye is gouged out in the egg world, and she wakes up in her foyer like curled up, and her just one eye is crying. Which interestingly enough is the opposite of the one eye that was crying when Koito's tears drip on her. But in the first episode, which I found just visually very interesting. But there is this whole like to quote another anime blogger person and a Twitter person, like there is this whole like very Twin Peaks like Black Lodge conclusion to this, where it's like, okay, which eye is on the floor at the end of this episode? And it does leave it like vague enough that there's a lot open to interpretation there too.
Fair enough. Right, we're actually done on Patreon questions. So thank you very much to Kate, and thank you very much to Rackham for submitting those. We're going to move on to talking about this, but I'm going to be honest. I think the questions have thoroughly covered what I was going to talk about. I will therefore open the floor to you two to talk about anything else you wish to discuss.
Did anyone want
questions?
did we get any questions about flower language? Because I don't want to just like launch into everything. I feel like I've explained everything enough in blog posts that I don't know if that's redundant to repeat. I just saw that people were like, "Are you going to talk about it?" And
we haven't had any questions.
I don't know what you want me to talk about. I guess it's what my response to that would be.
Okay, so
we haven't. Sorry, on.
Oh no, I was gonna say so. Just because people were asking, and for my benefit as well, like in terms of being summative about the show. You were saying that episode 11 was a bit of a bookend, florally speaking. Could you like elaborate on that? Like what? So how like lay out that functionally for all of us, how that works?
So basically a lot of the flowers that are used in the first 3 episodes of the series are revisited in that episode with really specific shifts in lighting to make them appear different colors, which is a mechanic that I mentioned previously, that was introduced with Rika and her flower field, because in certain lightings the lilies look white, and then in other lighting the lilies look orange, and the meaning changes very drastically uh, from kind of like a purity and innocence, a return to innocence, which is why they're known as like a really common funeral flower, to outright like hatred. Uh, so, which is the orange version. So it shows how just different how the show plays with lighting to tell different things, and you see that in the episode when Frill is in the garden. You see her in a lot of the same shots that I is in when she walks through the garden at night, and everything is colored blue. Um, so that's where it bookends a lot of the flower language in a really coherent way, especially if you've been paying attention to it for the entirety of the show.
Okay.
Kate wants to know how it, like, in a broad sense, like how understanding the flower language like impacted your view of like what was going on with the characters of the plot. Like, you know, did it reveal anything to you that might otherwise have not been as clear and concrete?
I think the reason why I've come out of the gate as such a Sawaki hater is definitely because of the flower language. So like my opinion of him is really, really bad because of the way that the series has framed him, both just visually, from the way that he's often like half out of frame or kind of looming outside of Ai's door, or Steve Jones at A&M did a really good piece on the episode where he draws Ai and how that's really uncomfortably set up visually as well. But
That's fair.
then the flower language is really unkind to him. It like definitely assumes the worst in the way it frames him. So if anything, I feel like the reason why I go so hard in on him is definitely because of the flower language. And the reason why I'm so harsh on him as a character is probably because of that. Also, the reason why I was so immediately kind of forgiving of Rika, despite the fact that she comes out of the comes out of the gate is just like this incredible piece of shit. It is also because of the flower language in her episode. I was like, wow, I really like her. She obviously has issues that some of which are kind of hard to forgive. It's hard to forgive like her behavior, even if you understand where it's coming from. But
right.
But I think it sets her character up so well to have her like tumbling out of this hydrangea bush, and the way that her field works, again based on the way the lighting shifts across it, the way the flowers themselves change, I think is really cool, because she is a character who's had a lot of really obviously negative stuff happen to her, and it's influenced what she says, even if she doesn't believe in what she says. And to have this like incredibly coherent secondary visual language telling you who she actually is and how she desperately wants to reach out to people with like heartfelt emotion and make these connections is really poignant. So that's another example where I was like, okay, like this girl, she has a lot of issues, but she's pretty great. That would be another case of where I was like, wow, this show really, really is using choreography in a way that I definitely haven't seen since Naoka Yamada, in terms of creating an entire other visual narrative that's running alongside, like parallel to what you're seeing happen on screen.
Excellent. I'm just going to throw one quick 2-cent opinion on this, which is just to point out that, and this is not me being dismissive at all, but my knowledge of flowers starts and ends at pretty. I buy them for people. That's really about all I know. And
They smell nice.
but the thing is, like, I think that when
They
it comes
don't
to
know
something,
It's true.
it's
true.
I think when it comes to something like this, for the uninitiated like myself, I always would want it to be something that complements, but isn't, like, strictly speaking, necessary to understand everything. Like, it's not a pivotal linchpin, otherwise the show is completely incomprehensible. That's not the case here. So I'm going to point out that I still, of course, really enjoyed the show. I've still got a lot from it. But I like, as you've read about, there's additional layer on there for people who know. And of course, we do live in an interconnected world now where you can find this information out, such as on your blog posts, as it turns out.
We,
which I, of course, will...
Yeah, well, I was going to say, we rely on you in the way that you speak about relying on Kevin and the Sakuga blog people. We rely on you for the florography.
Yeah, I just need a red telephone here that has your name on it, so I can ring you every time I've got, like, every time there's like flower. Yeah, I got a flower issue here. What is it going on?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Camillas. Tell us about the
a lot of
Camillas.
anime use it. Yeah, like, and a lot of anime use florography really simply. Like ancient Magus Bride, and the use of poppies is, like, really good there too. But it's not a complete secondary visual language like it is here, like it is in, I think, A Silent Voice and Liz and the Bluebird. A Silent Voice in particular, though, because there are other visual tells, like there's like this narrative where there's X's over people's faces, and by X's I mean like a very blatant, like, cartoon X over a lot of people, for a very specific narrative reason, in a similar way that, like, Dudadada used color with their background characters, and there's one moment where they all go from grayscale to color.
That's such a cool moment. I love that.
So fucking good. It's still, like, one of my favorite.
Yeah.
One of my favorite visual things I've ever seen in
It's
anime,
awesome.
honestly. But to have something like that, to have a visual language that, like, you don't need to have, but adds a lot to understanding, I think is definitely the best way to do it, because then when you discover that, it adds a whole other layer, but it's also not necessary to getting the rest of the show. And, like, I think for the example of Sawaki, like I said, I went harder on, I think, most anyone I know of, but he's not framed particularly well by the show visually, even without that. So I think that's also an important thing to show.
I want to point out that I was right there with you from the beginning on this podcast. Maybe not from episode 1, but from a very early episode, maybe from like episode 3 or 4. It's like, this guy, he's very bad. He's one of the bad ones in a show about. I was like, it just really clicked with me for really early on, I guess, because of the framing and the Seiyu performance. Just that, like, oh, this is a show about victims and abusers, and so, like, what they're doing is painting this portrait of one, a more holistic portrait of one, while the monster of the week is the bad ones.
You saying that just makes me think, like, at the outset, if you thought yourself, like, oh, it'll just turn out he's actually just a perfectly nice and regular normal guy, I'm like, that would have been very weird.
Then there's a lot of really, like, questionable intentionality behind like the shot selection and stuff that you really have to wonder about. Why are they doing this?
Yeah,
like,
because he's a creeper. Just saying. But anyway, I'll just quickly, Emily, if you would like to, shout yourself out, by the way, on where people can find your blog.
Oh, wait a minute.
Wonder Dragon.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
Time. What? We're not done, my friend. There's more show to go. Okay. So.
Oh, I thought it'd be relevant for just to pull down while we were talking about.
The floral language. You know what? You're right. Please, plug away.
So coincidentally, actually entirely coincidentally, my blog is for me in full bloom .wordpress.com, which is actually a Hanakimi reference, which is for you in full bloom. So yeah, it has nothing to do with the fact that I write about flowers. It just so happened that way.
It
But
works. It works. Okay, over to you, Doc. You had something else you wanted to bring up?
Okay. I have a couple of questions for you guys that,
Oh boy.
you know, I'm just, I don't know, I'm just like some help thinking through what you guys thought was going on. So when our young ladies clear the game, and actually I think, man, maybe we should talk about the whole gacha element of this, if they really kind of followed through on that as well as they could have. But when they clear the game, and they see kind of the suicide victim that they were explicitly trying to help kind of like appear for a moment and fade away. What's happening there? Not even just from a metaphysical point of view, but just thematically, like what's going on there?
You can't bring someone back to life.
Is it really that obvious? I mean, is that the like it just seems like it's more to it than that, right?
It doesn't have to be more complex than that.
Yeah.
Like the game was always rigged. I didn't see it. I didn't see a world where they would ever be able to actually resurrect someone.
Sure, I agree.
And you can't undo, which is what makes the whole it's kind of what makes the whole like which eye is at the end of the final episode kind of interesting, is like, because you can't bring someone back to life, right? Like part of that whole conversation is you've already committed suicide, but I'd like you to know that you were loved the entire time, and I'll try to, like, she tells her, like, I'll try to bring you back because I'm sure your mom is lonely, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you still can't, like, you can't bring someone back.
It would trivialize it.
I honestly
no
think
doubt.
it's just that simple.
I agree.
Okay.
The only thing I'll add as well is that, and I think this is just me pointing this out, not wanting to go into more vastly, but I think that the victim, when they're brought back, they're brought back by Frill. But again, we'll have to wait for episode 30 to see if there's any meaning or reason behind it. Because you see, like, I think it's with the start of like when Haruka comes back, you see like these quick cuts of like video monitor screens, which are the ones Frill is watching through, which we of course see later on. But for what reason she's doing that, we'll find out later in June, I guess.
Right.
Stay tuned.
So I think the additional layer that I'm looking for, thinking about it, is perhaps not just that you can't bring someone back, but like the fact that that's so obviously true, and yet the people that pulled the strings and run this game will dangle that possibility in front of people that are hurting, and then just this little ditty happens at the end where they see them for a moment and they go away. Like the game was always rigged, that maybe just like to underscore that point. Okay. Because I just was like watching it and trying to just racking my brain thinking like, what is like the significance of this? But like, I think that's probably it. Another question was, do you think, so Shadon specifically said, I think that in episode 12, understood the truth of who Sawaki was.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's the case? Both of you, do you think like she admitted to herself and is like, has the truth like internalized and integrated, like Sawaki, abuser, digs me, wants to be with me in a certain kind of way, and do you think she like has all that and she's not in denial about that anymore? Because like if that's the case, I don't know, like what she's doing at the end is saying, I want my mom to be happy and be with Sawaki. I want my mom to be happy and be with like this creep. Like, like that doesn't seem. That seems kind of weird.
I think it's pretty. So I don't know if she accepts like the truth of how he looks at her. I think he does accept. I think what she does accept is that the person who he is not the idealized version of him that she fell in love with. But I think in terms of like what this means for her character, I think it's incredibly in character for I to be like, well, I just want someone close to me that I care about to be happy, and therefore I will accept this and move on. And I think that's what happens with her and her mom, because I think part of the negativity of that whole situation is that to some extent she was jealous of her mom for
sure
being that the like visible target of Saoki's affection. So regardless of what his motivations and intentions are, I think the most important thing there is that she doesn't let it get in the way of seeing how much her mom loves her, and the only way she can think to reciprocate it is to just be like, okay, like you have my blessing. And that's why I think the conversation that Triangle Eye has with her mom on the couch is really good too.
Yeah, I think she does say that she's going to stop being selfish, right? And or no, like forget the me that wants attention, I think is the Funimation subtitles. And then the like big when she like the burst of energy comes out, she says like she wants to believe. I was like, what is it that she wants to believe? Like that, like that everything will be okay. Which I mean,
in itself,
it seems like wonderfully naive, but like that's I in some ways, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, Neru says that in episode 5, I think. Is like, no, you're like actually really cool for being this way, despite the fact that most people are not this.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if at all if the final episode resolves Sawaki in the real world, because of course what we've seen here is the resolution of like Ai's internal conflicts, but what does that mean in terms of like how it affects her real life and her like relationship, which I use strictly just in the neutral sense, like her relationship with him. But we'll see. I don't even know if they necessarily even have time to address it, depending on how long, especially so much of it is up in the air. But I think that I probably wouldn't mind so much if he just simply didn't turn up again in the show at all. Because I think we've ultimately still got the resolution for her, and I think that if there was such like a scene where she's like, says something to like get the fuck out of my life or something like that, I think it would merely be the full stop on the sentence we've already been given, if you know what I mean. Where you get a little extra, but it wouldn't be necessary. I don't know. It depends on how it's pulled off, but I think overall I'm still satisfied with the conclusion because it's still very.
I don't really think he needs to appear again. He might anyway, but like in terms of emotional narrative, I don't really think he needs to come back. I think he will, but I don't really think he needs to.
Yeah.
Again, based on like logistically what I think the show is going to address, it's going to be a lot more like episode 11 than episode 12.
Yeah,
that's what I can see that. That's what I'm like predicting for episode 13.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I mean, I made that joke before about the Undertale pacifist run, but if you think I'm kidding, like one of the most consistent character elements of Ai has been her kindness to other people. That's something that other characters have noted. It's how she bonded with Momoe, for example, in the episode 5 when Momoe is introduced. It has generally been like her shining strength. And so you have Frill, who has known nothing but, for the most part, abuse, violence, neglect, you name it.
That's cruelty, man.
So what happens when these two forces meet? that again, I joke, but it's true. It is the Undertale pacifist boss fight. It really is. So I'd be curious to see like how that plays out because I always feel like I can map it in my head, like that kindness does win the day versus like what's happened to Frill, and that Ai's kindness will heal her, save her, whatever.
Right. Well, I think it's like you said about the kind of comfort that the show gives to the potentially suicidal, that when you see it on paper in outline form, it may appear rote, but in execution, it was very heartfelt. I think it could be the same. I mean, I'm hopeful it'll be the same. Even if like you said, you see it all before you in outline form, even if they do that,
Yeah.
like it could still be, really kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I just hope that they don't spend time answering questions that people either don't ask or don't care about, if you know what I mean. I mean, as Emily's
Yeah.
rightly pointed out, and as I've said before, why worry about it is we're just like, we've had the emotional resolution, and what I fear we're going to get is a mechanical one, where it's like, oh, we've wrapped this all up and things go back to normal now, and I'm like, I don't care.
Well, what sucks is
Like,
what they're going to do is the Akkas are going to play a prominent role. You know what I mean? And it's going to be more of this sort of like humanizing of them and trying to like redeem Uraraka as like, oh, he was kind of a good one, like, right? Like, even though he didn't do shit to help poor Frill, fucking stuck in a coffin for 14 years. I just, to me, episode 11, like had these two huge issues, and the one, with how it talked about the temptation of death, that's like very much like, I think, a personal thing. Like, does it upset you, or are you cool with it? But I think maybe even worse is like, it truly does make this whole story a conflict, like about the Akkas. Like, these girls are just participating in the Akka's story. You know what I mean? Like, in their whole thing with Frill, their conflict, their grand plan to fight her. And I just think that they're just going to be featured too much, is my feeling.
I think it'll work depending on how, because like ultimately, and I think the show has done a varying job of this, but I think it's been coherent enough that ultimately the quote unquote enemy is like strict societal rules that are imposed on these women and kind of profit off of the pain that they feel, that is either ignored or written off as something that's not particularly important, or considered wrong for whatever reason, or unjustified when it is. And in that case, I do think there's a good blueprint. And again, I point to something like Utena, where you have one person taking on the system who's already gone through her own emotional narrative for the most part, and come out the other side, and is now going to look at the system from a more holistic standpoint and be like, okay. And I, as someone who's always kind of poked at the system by nature of who she is, right? Like, she's like, to use something that's like very visually obvious, and also something the show is like outright said, but like, she is a sunflower, right? In every sense of and meaning of what that is. And so she's kind of already poked at the system in terms of how she befriends people naturally, and how she still, despite everything, kind of wants to believe the best in other people. I think it already positions her as an odd outlier to the system. And there is a world that in that final episode, even if the Akkas are featured prominently, depending on how she takes down the system, it could end up being really, really good. But yeah, in
I hope
terms of
so.
like the actual mechanics, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Yeah.
unfortunate because I feel like a lot of stuff that has yet to be explained is just mechanics. But we'll see.
Yep. We will find out in due course, no doubt. Do you have anything else you want to ask, Doc?
How old do you think these young women are? Does it say for sure, or do we know?
14.
My guess
pro-
is the upper end of junior high, which is like freshman year of high school in the US education system. So like, yeah, like 14, 15
Well, let me just tell you
would be
something.
my guess.
Let me tell you all something. I didn't get to answer this question because I had to step out for a moment, but I'm going to answer it now. The relationship with and her mom. As a parent of a young girl who is about to turn 11, so not very far away from this age at all, the show fucking scared the shit out of me. Okay, like one of the most like tense watches I've had in a long time, because, and I mean, it's been a long time since I've been a teenager, but I can remember feeling that the parents and older people in my life wouldn't understand the certain pains I was going through, so I wouldn't talk to them. And that's me just talking as a dude. Like, there's whole other experiences that I have, know nothing about, that for a young woman. And like, it's terrifying, like, that your daughter might not like confide in you or your partner, and
I didn't tell my parents shit. I was
I didn't
bullied
either.
to hell and back, and I didn't tell my parents shit.
I didn't either. And like, that's just what's terrifying, man. I like not just the worst case scenario, of course, depicted in the show, but like, I mean, your children, people you love, going through this like fucking needless pain is extremely difficult to, like, I'm in such denial about it on one hand, but on the other hand, I'm like, oh my God, like, it's coming. But really kind of swallowing the full, like, okay, this is here and could happen, is probably going to happen. Like, it's just a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
And this show like brought it home, and it just felt like the depiction of these ladies and their pain just felt so fucking real. And they're 14 years old. And it's like, it's just terrifying. I mean, it's just so scary. And we're trying our fucking goddamned best to like cultivate an environment at home that is like open and very trusting, communication lines very important, all that kind of thing. And my partner is much better at all that than me. Thank God that she is here helping with this. But still, I mean, it's just, yeah, it is a deep, like, this show is like, I know for many people, like, they sort of see their personal experiences in it, right? And that's how it's sort of, there's this existential weight. But like, for me, it's like, it's this totally different. Like, I'm, like the mom, like, I's mom. I feel like it's me.
Well, hey, Doc, for what it's worth, like, the fact that you're cognizant of it and thinking about it alone puts you probably well beyond.
I mean, I guess I'm sure everybody worries about their kids, but like, yeah, I don't know. I just like, you just pray that you get through it without permanent scars.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be fine, man. I'm sure you will. All right. Do any of us have anything else we want to add about the show? Any other talking points? Anything else to discuss?
Should we talk about it as a whole, like the whole kit and caboodle?
Oh boy. Okay, we shall then. We shall. And I'm just going to basically say very quickly this. Not a lot of shows emotionally affect me. This one, like, did multiple times, which shocks me a little bit. Like, episode 7, I've had it on record, and I'll repeat again very briefly. I am estranged from my mother. Like, so the whole thing with Rika's mother, like, really hit me quite hard. Um, Everything else about the whole, like, discussion of suicide, like, I've been through it before, like, been through suicidation in the past. Like, the thing that happened at the end of episode 12, and how I honestly felt, like, shook by how finally I felt like, hey, this is a message that I can get behind it, or at least a message I've heard before. I just wish two things. One of which is, and this actually kind of overrides the second, is I really, really wish this show was made in a universe where it was allowed to be the thing it needed to be in terms of both its length, its scope, and also its production without actively fucking harming people. Like, I feel like, again, this show could have been 24 episodes long, which would have given ample time for it to give more like time to the other three girls, not just I, and also properly flesh out the thrill stuff into something that doesn't feel like it was shoehorned in at the last second, and also has problematic implications. And never mind the fictional characters, never mind fictional people, it would have given the very real people who made this show the time, the support, the resources they need to make it in a way that didn't result in one of them going to hospital, and God knows what else happened otherwise. So I applaud the show for its ambition. I applaud the show for getting these messages across that are still very relevant and need to be put out there. I'm glad it's tackling this stuff. But for God's sake, can we not fucking have it happen in such a way where we literally put a guy in hospital and made it to fit an archaic 12 episode format that doesn't give it the time it actually needs to truly, properly do this material justice? Ugh, fuck's sake. I mean, we talked more about like alternate timelines in this show. How about the alternate timeline where this was made and it wasn't, literally harming people? Fucking hell. But no, if I had to put it down to brass tacks, I think this show is going to be probably a high watermark for me for this year, even with its flaws, even with its production issues. And I think I can readily hold both of those true in my head. Like, show's great, just made in an awful way, basically. That's my feeling on it. But I'll also add that that's my opinion, and Lord knows this show is going to be polarizing, has been polarizing as is, although on some fronts I don't get, like, oh, Sawaki's really innocent. Like, miss me with that shit.
I can't. It's so crazy.
Miss me with that shit. Honestly. But like, I again will speak more to people who've like been through suicidal ideation, who in their own ways, like, or even just the fact that, I'm a guy, and this is a show about women and women's pain specifically. People will have very different experiences, and that's all valid. Except for the Sawaki shit. You're fucking wrong. All right, I'm done. Over to you.
I think.
Go ahead.
Or do you want me to go first? Or
yeah. That's what I was gonna say. Is why don't you go?
I think for what it tries to do, it's incredibly ambitious. I think for similarly to how it was overly ambitious with production, I think it was a bit overly ambitious with trying to say what it wanted to say within the amount of time they did know they had. I think there are a few things that could have been handled a lot better with a little more clarity in terms of maybe introducing them sooner or making it slightly more cohesive with the like what it is, I guess, telling instead of showing. Sorry, in my opinion, there's actually nothing wrong with like telling something if you have other things that are showing and also are making it so that it's cohesive throughout the entire thing. And I do think the show is kind of spotty in that regard in some points, specifically with trying to explain certain mechanics of the world. And that could also be that I just personally don't care about them, and I'm always going to gravitate more towards emotional narratives. There are a lot of things that I think the show really gets right. Suicide and about suicidal ideation to stuff I already mentioned previously with like how it can be like literally nothing like dividing the decision to go through with it or not.
Mhm.
Like it can be so stupid. Like to my point, the thing that kept me from killing myself was getting swine flu. Like that's just so bizarre, right? Like you'd think it would push you in the other direction actually. Um to make like a really dark joke that I actually shouldn't have. Like um it's I think there's a lot of other things it gets right, like the um treatment of Kaoru I thought was like really great visually, emotionally. He was awesome. It's really rare that I get to see anime actually treat like a trans character well. And Kaoru comes off as just this incredibly badass boy that you want to root for the entire time.
Yeah.
That entire episode is actually just like insanely good.
It's great.
But so like there's a lot of stuff I think it gets right in terms of that. There's a lot of stuff I think it gets right in terms of the how quickly your emotion can change and how many emotions are involved when someone close to you dies or kills themselves because there's just so much uncertainty. One thing I think this show kind of gets is also like alongside the confusion, kind of like an anger, like a latent anger that's really great. Like when I is in Rika's first, like the first time she goes to Rika's world, and she is sees these two women who are, I think this entire Wonder Killer could have been executed better, but like the two girls who kill themselves to be with their idol. Um and she processes her own anger through this idea of like, why didn't you talk to me? Like I am actually pissed that you didn't confide in me because then I could have done something about it. And I think that happens with all deaths. I think there's this kind of anger, whether it be at the person for leaving you or at the world for taking someone from you. That I think this show really gets as well, at least in that moment. Like I actually really appreciated that. Like the fact that like it's okay to be angry about this, you
Yeah.
know? Like it's okay to be fucking pissed. I liked that a lot. I liked the way it handled a lot of stuff. I loved the conclusion of Ai's emotional narrative, and I thought that was really good. And like I said, I think if you'd been paying attention to what the show was telling you visually, what the show was telling you with the Wonder Killers and that setup, um, this, like I said, this episode reminded me a lot of episode 2 with Minami, and in that way, I think the show, uh, as a whole, from episodes 1 to 12, is very coherent and conclusive. And I think regardless of what happens with episode 13, I initially tweeted that I wasn't sure what to make of this episode, and I've actually like changed my mind almost completely on that after watching it again. Um, I think that regardless of what happens to episode 13, I'll be able to take these 12 episodes and be like flawed but very good, you know? And
Yeah.
I really appreciated my time with it.
Yep.
So for me, like, I think, like, I'll probably just end up saying what you both have said in a lot of ways, that like
Mm.
the show, I think I want to compartmentalize. um I'm gonna do the privilege thing, right, and compartmentalize uh the circumstances surrounding its creation, which we can all say like they're bad, they should not exist. The organizations working to change them, I think, are worth supporting, and we should, uh, you know, do what we can and wish them well so that things could be changed in this regard. So setting that aside, right, and just kind of looking at the art itself. Um, I think as like the more I'm probably removed from it, like I think the more fondly that I'll look back on it, like as more time passes, because I so much anime, I think, is like very safe. And this show, especially for like a first time effort from so many people, is like just remarkable in a lot of ways. You know, I mean, I've talked about my issues with different parts of it today and on other days. But boy, I think appreciate its like ambitiousness, as you put it, Emily. It's audaciousness to tackle the kinds of things that it wants to tackle, and being, like, as you said, coherent and cohesive thematically throughout the show. Not every step lands, but I think its heart is in the right place on most of the time. Specifically, like you shouted out Kaoru. I mean, I thought that episode 10 I'm on record as being like a big fan of what was going on there. And episode 7 is incredible. Episode 2 as well. I think you're spot on with how important the Wonder Killer, sequences are there in really like showing like the full breadth of like what the show is trying to get across with the whole Wonder Killer deal, mechanic, whatever. And I mean, just as like a show, regardless of like the metaphysics and the mechanics of its universe, a show that's just about like the pain of young women and the way that both institutions and individuals prey on that pain and profit from it, in plain sight, was like portrayed in just such like authentic way, at least a more authentic than I can remember seeing an anime over the course of a whole show. Like there may have been episodes or arcs or whatever that like touched on certain elements of it. This is the way it was done here, like so kind of explicitly rather than symbolically, I think is commendable. And I mean, there's a lot to commend the show for. And like I said, I think I'm going to, as time goes on, kind of think about like the individual faults and nitpicks less, and think more about the highs, which I think were very, very high for this show. And artistically, I mean, I haven't even really talked too much about like the way the show looks and moves. I mean, it's just beautiful. And again, setting aside the conditions which it was made, like, it looks incredible. And, I mean, I think, like you said, Shadon, this will definitely be in the discussion when we are talking about 2021, best shows and best stuff we watched. Yeah. And I think that regardless of what happens in June, I think what we got now, very memorable and overall very good, and is, I hope that the director gets another shot, and that the production committee that they just figure all this shit out.
In this specific case, it's not really the production committee. That's what I was trying to say at the beginning of the thing. Like, the production committee is, I guess, kind of responsible for bad messaging, but in this case, it's kind of more on the director and their team for being like, we want to keep it really, really small, which, like,
okay,
I think to a lot of extents is good. That's why I brought it up in the very beginning. Not that there isn't a massive problem with the whole industry and production committees, because there definitely is. It just so happens in this case that Wonder Egg Priority was actually more of an outlier.
Okay.
Well, I just want to throw that out
that's
there,
right. No,
just
thank you.
in case of like misinformation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the correction, because that is important. So yeah, no, I hope that like that what has happened can be learned from, in terms of course, like the health of animators and people working on it, producers, all that. But in addition to all that, I hope that like the director takes another crack and makes something else that's bold while learning from what didn't go so well here in terms of like storytelling and planning. That they get to make something else, whether or not it's dealing with the same theme, just get another crack at it. Because like, I think that like this is definitely someone who I'm now very interested to see what the next thing is that they're going to make, and what it has to say. This is totally apropos of nothing that's just been said, and this may have been in bad faith, I don't know, but very early on in the chat, someone asked, Wonder Egg priority, homophobic or no? And I think, like, I feel like no. just to get on record and answer that question. Do you agree? Or do you disagree?
I'm trying to think as to how it would come across, and I guess it's because I and Koito weren't in, like, initially, and I'll say this, initially I thought it was going to come out that I had a crush on Koito, and that was like the reasoning behind like their friction. But I kind of like the way it came out better, I guess. Though the question, if you are asking it in good faith, would be how like Momoe's entire arc was handled, and then also how like it was kind of hinted at possibly I having a crush on Koito, but that didn't turn out to be the case. I don't know. I don't really find the show particularly problematic in that way, though.
No, for me, we had that long discussion about Momoe's arc in our previous episode, so I'll not restate any of that here. Beyond saying that the questions I had at the end of that have not yet been answered, but I'm going to leave it at the wayside. I'm not going to dwell on it. The only thing I'll note is, and I'm going to bring this up briefly because I don't think it really ultimately matters, but there was potentially an implication of one of the acts. I don't remember which one. Like, Frill uses the word husband. Now, for me personally, I wouldn't trust that, and I don't think there's any implication about the being gay or bi. Beyond that, I think it may have just been her putting a jab at him, really. Because otherwise, the implication of that is that if you again buy into my theory that I said before about, Frill is their creation, then it turns out it's gay men who did that, and that's, Jesus fucking Christ, no thank you. I don't like that at all. So no, the answer is no, I don't believe it is.
I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
They weren't coded that way at all, so...
I didn't think so either.
I is coded as being bi, though, from the first episode.
Definitely.
But in terms of like the actual framing, the Akkas are not framed that way at all, actually.
No. It's a barb, I think, that Frill uses rather than it being a statement of fact.
I thought she was referring to how she felt about her own relationship with Akka.
No, she was saying something like, do you think your husband's like been cheating on you?
No, she was saying, she was asking him a hypothetical question. Like, who do you hate more? Do you hate your husband for cheating or the woman who seduced him? I think it totally applies to Frill. Akka cheating on Frill, who Frill wants to spend all her time pleasing the Akkas, right? That's what,
maybe then, yeah. But either way that you slice it, I don't think it applies. So no.
Yeah. Okay, we can move on from that then. Okay. So should we rate Shadon?
Yes, we should. For this particular block of episodes, I'm not going to rate the show as a whole because I'm going to save that for when we've watched episode 13. So I'm going to give it the full picture. But for this particular block of episodes, I am going to give it... I'm trying. This is more a question of me trying to think of a funny
deep
thing
thinking
to say to go along, which is the more difficult element here. I am going to go with 4 out of 5 monochrome birthday cakes, because Frill's birthday cake is monochrome when we see it in Anaka's table at the very start. Most of my docking of points here comes from episode 11, to be quite honest. For everything I've said, episode 12 is definitely the stronger of the two and is certainly a good nose to finish on. I have nothing else to add beyond what I've already said. See me in June for my final assessment. Yo.
I'll go 4.25. Floating heads powered by paint tubes out of 5. How about you, Emily?
Did you know that the paint colors are the same as the one I uses in her thing?
Oh my goodness! Snap.
I mean, I also give it a 4 out of 5 because I'd say 3 out of 5 for episode 11 and 5 out of 5 for the final episode. So
basically, yeah.
You're only operating on the 5-point scale. We go. I go more granular.
What
with
is rating?
The quarter stars.
Really I don't care.
They're arbitrary. Arbitrary ratings.
It's fun.
Yeah,
it's just fun.
12 was better than 11, and the show was good. There
12 out of 10.
Sold it. Right, to the bar!
Yes. Okay, so I guess now is the time where we transition briefly from Wonder Egg to the Warui Deshou Hall of Fame. And for a brief moment, our lovely guest Emily will be a disembodied voice rather than on camera due to my own
sorry to excommunicate you.
Due to my own negligence. But after a brief musical sting, Hall of Fame.
I don't even know what the music is. I'm just dancing.
Yeah,
it's Friday night, I'm gonna dance. Sod it.
Oh, look, well, they can sort of see. I don't know. This is turned out very strange here, but it's fine.
God.
It's fine.
You've made her wrong wall. It's like a Sonic fever when it glitches out.
It's fine. It's fine. We're gonna power through it. All right. So the Warui Deshou Hall of Fame. What is it, Shadon?
Basically, we pick an anime or a scene from an anime or something along those lines that we feel is worthy of remembrance and notability because it's cool, awesome, personal, you name it.
Yes. So we've had in the past Thorkel. We've had the Gunbuster robot pose. We've had Macross Quarter surfing. And the last stream of thought, we had the Crucifix minigun carried by Nicholas D. Wolfwood from Trigun. Shadon, this week is your pick. What are you going to induct into the Hall of Fame this week?
It's going to be the Bubblegum Crisis episode Revenge Road. Yes.
Ooh,
yes.
BGC. All right, why is this Hall of Fame worthy? Tell us.
Because this is probably more broadly just Bubblegum Crisis in general. It's something I watched recently, and we don't get stuff like that anymore, which makes me sad. We don't get stuff that is unambiguously a passion project made by people who have a love for the culture they've consumed in such a way that it becomes apparent. Like, there are references everywhere. Like, the main character was named Pris, as in Pris from Blade Runner, so on and so forth. Much of the music is flat out copied, if not plagiarized, from songs of the 80s. It wears its influences on its sleeve, but it, to me, came across as one of those things that was made because the people who were making it loved that kind of fiction, those kind of worlds, that kind of cyberpunk aspect. But they did their own thing with it as well. They had likable female characters, you had robot exosuits. And yes, it was cancelled prematurely because of reasons that I'm currently not privy to off the top of my head. It was tragically cut short. But here's the thing, right? Revenge Road is the 4th episode, and it is, to me, an exemplar of what this show could have been if it had been allowed to have its full run. And it's basically just a pulpy revenge story where, there's a guy who's out for revenge, and he's got a souped-up, cybercar that's going to make him do this, and all that. But he's really hurting his sister, who's, he brings along for the ride with him. And then, of course, you've got the car as metaphor for things going out of control, running away, etc., etc. And yeah, the people he's trying to get revenge on are just a gang of bikers. We don't even like get any of them named. It is with a story that's completely divorced from like the overall story of the boomers. Yes, the villains in the show are known as boomers, which
Indeed.
I will never not find funny. And
it's very good.
yeah, I am just generally of the opinion that Bubble and Crisis is awesome, and I wish there was more of it. In the sense that I wish they'd been able to fulfill their original vision for it and not do the supposedly awful remakes they did, which I don't intend to watch. But Revenge Road to me is the exemplar episode of that entire block of 8, and I would like it in the Hall of Fame simply because it is like the high watermark of a profound passion project from the 80s, and it makes me respect old anime even more. There you go. That's my case.
I second it. I do not veto it. This episode belongs in the Hall of Fame. Bubblegum Crisis is great. Unfortunately, I've only seen the remake that you speak of, and it was fine.
Oh, no.
But I have not. I own, as I said at some point on the podcast before, I own BGC, the original, the Anime Go DVD set. Just haven't watched it. Have to be in the mood for like 8 consecutive 80s anime music videos. Which, when I say it out loud, it's like, how can you not be in the mood for that ever? So maybe I should just watch this immediately.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Okay.
But yeah.
A worthy addition to our Hall of Fame. And now Emily is back in full view.
Hello.
Scary.
Yes. No, not
you're-
scary. I think that is going to... That's going to do it for the show.
Yeah.
We've made it through talking about WEP 11 and 12 and the show as a whole, answered patron questions, shouted out a creative, did a Hall of Fame. I think that's an episode. So, Emily, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you.
For hanging out with us, for talking anime, and for being such a cool gal and being willing to come on so often.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not cool.
You
But
be,
yes,
you
thank
be,
for
you
having
be
me here.
cool.
Lies.
You be cool and knowledgeable, and just a real joy to have on the pod. So,
Indeed, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Shadon, thank you.
Yeah,
Where
I did what I usually do.
Well, listen, you were great, and don't let
Well,
anybody.
it's
I don't
me,
care.
me.
I don't care what Reddit says. You're great. You're great.
Oh, what Reddit's been talking smack about me, or is it?
Definitely. Reddit said to meet it behind the schoolhouse after school today. So after this podcast, you have a date with Destiny.
Nah, I've got more important things to do. Anyway, but yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking about this show. It's, I mean, it's always one of those things where I sometimes feel nervous about shows like this because I feel that they can be challenging to tackle. And also, as I feel nervous, like I come from the perspective of being a dude who's, again, whiter than white, who is cishet, and you know, traffics in a lot of topics that again I feel will be better covered by people for lack of a better phrase, have skin in the game because they can offer a much more nuanced insight than I can. And I would obviously again invite people to do that. Seek out the perspectives of LGBT+ people. Seek out the perspectives of women on this show. Don't let me and Doc be the sole perspectives that you take on board or like listen to as part of looking at this show. But of course, also thank you to everyone who's listened and joined us, be you patrons, be you freebies, you name it. Thank you very much for all your engagement and your commentary. And yeah, I will leave it there. Rum is awaiting me soon. I think it's gonna be a night, that's for sure.
Nice.
Well, Shadon, if people wanted to, you know, come at you about your Wonder Egg opinions or other ones, how would they do that?
Don't at me.
Okay,
No,
all right, Emily. No,
I'm kidding. You can find me at Shadon1010 on Twitter. Coming at me with stuff, I guess, kind of. You know, as long as it's in good faith, I'm game.
Emily, where can people find your work and speak to you on the internet?
If you want to follow my anime /personal /K-pop now account, it's at AJ the Fourth. If you're at all interested in electronic sports, mainly League of Legends. My work account is at League of Emily, and I'll be on the LCS broadcast tomorrow. So that'll be fun.
Go check it out.
Very, very nice. You can, of course, follow me at The Subtle Doctor on Twitter. If you would like to hear myself and Anime News Network's own James Beckett talk about various medias, you can follow... Right now, you just follow him at Kick the Beckett, and you should just follow him anyway because he's a cool guy. At some point, we're going to get a separate Twitter account for that podcast soon-ish, but you'll hear about that when we do. For now, it's just through James's account and my retweets. But yeah, we've talked about.
One second, Doc.
Oh, it's just we talked about Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee, 72 movie. That is a seminal movie for both of us. That episode's out. We recorded an episode on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is coming out soon. And tomorrow we are recording an episode on the Monsterverse, the Hollywood Godzilla, Kaiju, Kong, etc. movies. After I watch GVK tonight, I have been rewatching those other movies throughout the week. And tonight I feast upon the new one. I'm very excited to talk about these movies. I have a lot of fondness for them. I think they're super fun. So look out for that. What were you going to say, Shadon?
I'll add one final thing. If you're short on content this weekend, I'm going to be starting streaming again on Sunday. I will be doing a bonus Final Fantasy X stream where I will fight every single super boss. I've done all the necessary preparation for it. It's going to be a killing spree. That starts at 7 o'clock British Standard Time, Sunday, twitch.tv/Warui Deshou. Come join me as I fight giant slugs, bad doormen, or door women rather, and someone who takes a really, really long smoke break. It'll all make sense in context. I'm being circumspect, but yeah, all the super bosses, every single one. Check it out.
And as we said earlier, you can follow us on Patreon to get this kind of content early or exclusively. The link will be in, the YouTube description or the show notes in your podcatcher, however you're consuming this. You can follow us on Twitter at Warui Deshou and see when the newest publicly free and accessible episodes come out. And you can, of course, correspond with us that way through our personal Twitters or through Gmail, Warui Deshou, WARUIDESHOU @gmail.com. Give us a rating, a review, share, follow, like, subscribe, all the business. Click the buttons, give us engagement, etc., etc. Thank you very much for listening, everyone out there. Follow Emily's blog. Watch Shadon's Superboss stream. Enjoy Godzilla vs. Kong. And embrace each other, everyone, to the ends of the universe.
Good night.
Bring back the brothers.